Welcome to Mr. Nightbleed. Tonight in 7 creepiest graves ever discovered. Across the US, we return to the quiet edges of the world, where the hum of the living fades and only the wind moves through the graves. These are the stories buried in stone and soil, tombs that whisper, monuments that bleed history, and resting places that refuse to rest. Every account you're about to hear is real, taken from those who've stood before these graves and felt the chill of something watching from below. My goal this month is to reach 4,000 subscribers. Almost 90% of viewers wander in, listen, and vanish into the dark without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Join the darkness. Subscribe now. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what hour of the night it is for you. And if there's a grave or cemetery in your town that truly unsettles you, type its name below. Because when the world sleeps and the soil settles, some things beneath it do not rest. Kill the lights. Silence the world. Take a slow breath, and let us begin. I'm not writing this because I think anyone can fix what's wrong with Birch Hollow. I'm writing it because if I don't, I'll convince myself it was a weird summer job and nothing more. And I'll start walking across soft ground again without thinking about what might be underneath. I don't want that for me or for anyone else who strolls through an old cemetery in Maine, thinking it's just lawn work with prettier statues. I was 23 that June, broke after a winter of night shifts stocking shelves and a spring semester I couldn't afford to finish. My Aunt Lynn was the caretaker at Birch Hollow Cemetery, just outside Bangor city limits. Birch Hollow isn't the oldest cemetery in the area, but it looks like the idea you get when someone says Old Main Graveyard. Birch trees with bark like peeling paper, a sagging stone wall, angels with lichened tongues, and a road that loops in a figure 8 because the designer in 1890 thought curiosity was a nice shape. Aunt Lynn needed seasonal help and I needed rent, so I started on a Monday with a push mower, a weed trimmer, and a bright orange safety vest that made me look like traffic. On my first day, she handed me a map with squares and names inside the squares. "We're getting 4 burials this week," she said, pointing to little penciled rectangles near the back where the ground curved toward a wooded hill. "Stay out of those rows after they fill. The earth settles. Don't twist an ankle." She said it the way a mom would tell you to wait for cookies to cool. Practical. She never used words like haunted. It wasn't her style. There were 2 other regulars. Earl, the groundskeeper, was in his 60s and had a smoker's cough that sounded like crumpled paper. He'd worked there longer than I'd been alive. He knew the names without looking at the stones and talked to the dead like they were neighbors who'd helped him move a sofa once. Then there was Tash, a college kid like me who handled office calls and would walk sections counting stones after storms. Tash taught me the trick of spotting sunken patches by glancing sideways, not straight on. "Your eyes pick up shadows better," she said. She was always gentle with the places, like the grass could feel it. We had a run of quiet weather and then a stretch of brutal rain. The back section went glossy and slick. Wednesday afternoon, a funeral procession snaked in. Black umbrellas, a low tent, the whole scene. I stayed back with Earl under the birches. We don't intrude unless they ask. The name on the map was Merritt, Georgina, 61, Cancer. It's hard not to build a person out of the little facts. I found myself picturing a teacher with paper snowflakes taped to her classroom windows. The next morning, the soil over Merritt's grave was smooth and dark like a bruise you could step in. Aunt Lynn told me to rope off a few feet around it and to leave the stake in place for 2 weeks. "Settling," she said. "It happens." But that afternoon, Earl flagged me over. He had a look I hadn't seen on him yet, a kind of careful politeness people get around things they can't quite name. He was standing at the foot of the Merritt plot. Boot heels sunk a little into the top layer. He nodded at the dirt. "Feel that?" he asked. "Feel what?" I said. "Stand here. Don't hop, just stand." I did. It took a second for my nerves to stop firing from the idea of sinking. But when I stood still, I noticed it. A pressure under my soles. Not movement. Pressure. Like a big truck idling on the other side of a wall you're leaning against. Then it settled into a rhythm I couldn't unhear once I heard it. A slow, steady push and release. Earl didn't look at me. He stared at the trees and chewed the inside of his cheek. "It wasn't doing that this morning," he said. "It's the water," I said, because I wanted there to be an answer. "Groundwater air pockets." "Maybe," he said. And then he stepped off the mound and stood with his hands in his back pockets, watching me like he was ready to grab me if I sank. I stepped off too, and the feeling disappeared. When I stepped back, it took a breath for the pressure to show up again. Off the mound, it was gone. On the mound, it was there, and it was steady. And if you closed your eyes, it felt like the earth itself had lungs. We didn't tell Aunt Lynn that day because we didn't know how to tell it without it sounding like we were winding her up. We did what people do. We kicked it back and forth between weird quirk and this is nothing. Earl said the rain had pushed air through the vault. I said the same thing in different words. He tamped the soil in a couple of places with the back of a shovel, like maybe packing it down would teach it to be normal. Friday morning, a woman called the office from a house across from the back gate. Tash took the call. She hung up and put a hand over the receiver, her eyes wide. She says her dog barked all night. Says it's never done that. She says there's a sound coming off the hill back there. Tash whispered. Like a pump. Like a machine. We went out back and stood at the stone wall looking up toward where the new plots were. It was damp again, foggy and warm, and mosquitoes found us instantly. There wasn't any sound I could point to, not then, not at the wall. But when we walked up past the birches and over the bend, when we got into that back third where they'd been burying the last 10 years, I heard it again. The rhythm wasn't loud. You could miss it if you were pushing a mower. But it was there, and it made the hair on my arms lift. The way bass from a distant party can make a glass on your table tremble lightly. Aunt Lynn came out and stood on Georgina Merritt's grave like she was daring the earth to mess with her schedule. We're not going to start a panic about air in the vault, she said. We say the water table is high and we keep a log of calls. Earl, pull the maintenance sheets. Make sure the vault seal check boxes are signed. If we have to, we get the funeral home out here to reassure the family. She sounded like she was telling a line of people that the power company was on its way. Practical. But she kept glancing down. Just little flicks like her ankles could feel something she wouldn't admit out loud. By Saturday morning, the mound over the Merritt plot had a shallow depression like a thumbprint. We expect settling, but this was fast. Aunt Lynn made the call to the funeral home anyway. They sent a guy named Matt who showed up with a polite smile and new work boots. He crouched, he pressed his hand to the soil, and he stood. He went pale in a way that made me feel a mean little thrill because it meant I wasn't insane. That's unusual, he said, keeping his voice low because there were 2 families with flowers on the next loop. You sure the vault's sealed? We can pull the burial paperwork, Aunt Lynn said. Matt rubbed his palms on his jeans. I think we should get state permission and the family's permission to check. This is going to sound dramatic, but if we have gas pocketing under there, we don't want to blow a vault. It's rare, but it happens. He said the word gas like a life preserver. He could throw us all. He looked grateful to have a word that sounded technical. Family permission took until Monday. Those days are a blur of small, strange things. The map on the office wall slid a ½ inch every time I walked past it, like it was unlevel, except Earl checked with a bubble level, and it was fine. We started hearing whispers under the office floor. But that building is old, and mice like to make their lives inside old buildings. So I convinced myself that's all it was. A couple times I walked through the figure 8 and thought I saw someone standing across the bend. Not a ghost shape, just a person, a woman in a long skirt. The kind of person you could tell yourself was a relative visiting if she didn't always vanish when you turned your head. Monday morning, the Merritt family stood under the birches with sunglasses on even though the day was overcast. They signed papers with tight mouths. No one wanted to open her up. No one wanted to not open her up either. Not with that breathing ground. Tash stayed with them. Aunt Lynn called the city and they sent a clerk with a clipboard because Maine is the kind of place where even the supernatural has to be initialed by 3 offices before anyone does a thing. Set up a privacy screen of tarps because you don't disrespect grief by making it look like a show. Matt from the funeral home brought 2 other guys and a small team set to work. We didn't dig down all the way. We took off the top layer and brought in the lowering device to gently raise the vault enough to check the sides. The air got colder as we went down. That was the first thing nobody talked about in the report. It was June and I could see my breath in that rectangle of air over the vault. The second thing was the smell. Not rot, not flowers. Worn paper. Old book glue. A classroom that's been closed a summer too long. When the lid was accessible, Matt ran a gloved finger along the seam and nodded. Seal looks good, he said, relieved. Then he put his fingertips on the lid. and his knuckles went white because he was pressing down against the rhythm we all felt. Not loud, not dramatic, not enough to make you jump, just a push, a release, steady and unembarrassed. It went through the bones of my arm up into my jaw. My teeth buzzed. I saw Earl swallow twice and set his jaw like a man waiting for a wave to pass. Aunt Lynn looked at the family and the city clerk. The clerk cleared his throat and read a line about permission one more time, because that's what saved him from having to look at the dirt like it was an animal. And then Matt did what he does. He opened the vault. The lid came up with a sigh and the pressure stopped. The silence was so sudden it felt like a sound. We all leaned in without meaning to. The coffin was there, glossy wood, bright brass. Matt touched it with the back of his fingers and frowned. It was cold enough that a shine of condensation formed where he touched. He found the latches and turned them and asked Aunt Lynn one more time if we were sure, and she nodded and he lifted the lid. Inside was cloth. That's what my brain said first because it needed there to be something ordinary to land on. Satin lining, white as biscuits. The pillow where the head would go. But there wasn't a body. There wasn't anything at all except a folded piece of paper, creased into quarters, placed exactly where a chest would have been. Matt didn't reach for it. He stepped back like the paper might bite. The family didn't gasp or wail. They went very still in a way that made my stomach hurt. Because stillness like that means the world isn't operating under the same rules anymore, and you haven't decided how to exist inside that yet. The city clerk took his clipboard against his chest like a shield. "This is a crime scene," he said, his voice finding the fear and channeling it into procedure. "He told us not to touch anything." He called the police. He called his supervisor. I looked at Aunt Lynn. She looked at me and then at the piece of paper and then at the family's shoes because she is kind enough to know where to keep her eyes. Earl stepped back and back until his boot hit the shovel handle and stopped him. When the police arrived, they were as careful as you would be with the world if you suspected it might crack if you poked it. They took photos. They took statements. They put on fresh gloves and lifted the paper. It was old page heavy, not printer paper. The officer unfolded it. A breeze that had been hovering finally moved through and we all flinched because it sounded for a second like someone exhaling. The handwriting was neat, flat, and it said simply, "Stop digging." The officer cleared his throat like there was a joke in it, but there wasn't. He bagged the note. They closed the coffin. They closed the vault. They told the family they would find answers and drove off with lights but no sirens, because it was broad day, and there were 2 other services starting an hour later. By 5 in the afternoon, we were alone again with the hill and the birches and a place in the ground we'd opened and closed like a mouth. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the pressure came back and I couldn't tell if I was remembering or feeling. At 3 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from a number I didn't know. I listened because you always listen, and it was long and quiet, wind skimming over a microphone and then a faint, steady rhythm, like someone was using my phone to record a heartbeat through a wall. I held the phone away from my ear and watched the length of it tick up. It went on a minute, 2, and then ended like whoever was holding it had put their thumb over the mic. When I called back, the number wasn't in service. Tuesday, the ground in the back section looked normal. I stepped onto the merit plot with my jaw clenched and didn't feel the rhythm anymore. The air was regular. Birds were back. Earl lit a cigarette and didn't hide it because if ever a morning deserved a smoke, that one did. We told ourselves someone had messed with us. We told ourselves the note was a stupid prank put in the coffin at the funeral home by some kid who thought he was funny. We said the word empty out loud and got used to it in our mouths like a new filling. We said it enough that we started to believe the problem was paperwork. The mind is good at picking a lane and pretending it was always in it. That lasted until Thursday. A thunderstorm rolled across the river and knocked out power in the office for an hour. The lights popped back and the printers woke up spitting out blank pages like they were relieved to be doing anything again. The map on the wall fell off its hook, and when we put it back, whole rows looked slightly wrong even though the paper hadn't changed. Aunt Lynn sent me out to check headstones against the map, because touching things sometimes puts the world back where you left it. The air was thick and wet, and sound traveled the way it does in humidity. Thick and close. I walked the loop and nodded at names: Thorn, Pelletier, Ung. At the back, I saw a man standing where the ground rises a little before the fence line. He wore a baseball cap and an old jacket. His head was bowed like he was reading. I almost called out because we like to let people know we're around so we don't startle them with mowers. He lifted a hand without turning, and it was such a small, weird movement that I kept my mouth shut. I watched him for a few breaths. His hand moved again, palm up, and I realized he was tapping his fingers in a little steady rhythm against his own palm. It took me a second to place why that bothered me. He was keeping time to something I couldn't hear where I stood. He looked up then, not at me, but at the merit plot. He took a step and his boot sank at the toe like the ground had opened a mouth to take a bite. He didn't cry out. He didn't even startle. He just pulled his foot out and walked away without looking left or right. There wasn't a mark in the dirt where he'd sunk. The only evidence that anything had registered was a sneaker print on the bottom plank of the fence where he'd stepped over. I went to the office, and I said we should stop. I said we should put the whole back third under maintenance and tell people to bury in the older section until we figured out what the hill wanted. I was joking when I phrased it like that, but I wasn't. The hill wanted. That's what it felt like. Aunt Lynn is not a woman who uses the word wanted for land. She pressed her fingers against her eyes for a minute and said no. People die. People have places they've bought. You don't tell grief to relocate because of a feeling. The next day, I tried not to step where fresh soil lay. I took childish zigzags around mounds so recently smooth they looked ironed. I could feel the breath anyway, even at angles, even with my weight on the unmounded edge. It was weaker than before, as if it were saving its strength. I kept looking over my shoulder. Nothing was there except the academic calm of gravestones and acorns and the sense that someone was in the next room listening for when I would find the right door. That night Earl's daughter drove him to the ER. He'd been sitting in his easy chair at home when, as he told us later, the leg rest thumped like someone kicked it from underneath. His daughter laughed when he told her. In that way you laugh when your dad says the basement sounds funny, but then the chair thumped again and his beer slid off the arm and smashed. He swore he heard it then, through the floor. Not the house. Not the pipes. A rhythm traveling up through the joists. He is not a superstitious man, but he is an honest one. He went chalk white and couldn't catch his breath. They said panic attack and gave him something and told him to stay home a few days and not watch anything stressful. Like he was an old man with a too sensitive heart, and not a person who had been holding still over a breathing hill. By Sunday, I was ready to quit. I told myself I'd give my aunt through the end of the month. Sunday night, the cops finally called Aunt Lynn back about the note. The paper was old but not ancient. The ink was modern. Nothing to match against anything else. The phone call lasted 3 minutes and Aunt Lynn hung up and looked at me and said something I won't forget. We're part of the place we keep, she said, not the other way around. Monday evening, the last light found a hole in the cloud cover and set the angel statues to glowing like they'd swallowed candles. I was packing the shed when Aunt Lynn asked me to walk the back with her one more time. Call it insurance, she said. She brought her set of keys, the big brass ring that makes a noise you can hear through your pocket. We walked slow. We passed Merritt. The mound was flat now, grass sprinkled on top like confetti. We passed the older section where dates were carved in curls and someone had left a penny on a stone, and someone else had left a half-drunk Dunkin' coffee that somehow didn't tip in the wind. At the far end, near the wooded hill, the ground has a different feel because they filled it with trucked-in soil when they expanded. It's lighter. Your foot goes a little farther down. We both felt it at once. A pulse under the toe and then under the heel. I counted unconsciously. 6 seconds between pushes. Not human, not unless a person is sleeping very slowly. Out in the trees, something stirred and went quiet like it didn't want to get involved. You feel that, Aunt Lynn said. I do, I said. Keep walking, she said. I didn't want to. My body wanted to go light-footed like a kid near a pond because kids are smarter than we give them credit for. They know where the edge is. But I walked because she did. The pulse grew stronger in one spot and then weaker and then strong again as if we were passing over a vein. And at a patch where the grass hadn't taken yet, the soil went dark and shiny and my foot didn't stop. It sank not a little. To my ankle and then to my calf like a hand taking hold. Aunt Lynn grabbed my arm and yanked and I didn't come up. I didn't feel the bottom. I didn't feel rocks. I felt moving pressure all around my leg and a coolness that climbed my shin like a drink spilling. I felt something like fingers at my sock, gentle, not grabbing the way someone touches a sleeping child to see if they're feverish. The pulse didn't stutter. It didn't quicken. It continued and my chest decided it would give the air away if I asked. So I told it not to, and I told my hands to find the grass. and I told my aunt to let go because if she went in too, we'd both be in the hill up to our knees. And she told me to shut up. She lay down on her stomach like a lifeguard, hooked her ankles around a stump, and pushed her keys toward me with her offhand. "Hook," she said. And it took me a second to realize she meant hook the ring around my belt. I did, she pulled. The earth had the slow, greedy strength of a heavy blanket that doesn't want to give you back. I heard dirt slide against itself in a sound that didn't belong to sleep or hunger or water. It sounded like lips. She yelled my name like she never had in my life, like I was 6 and running into traffic. She didn't stop. I came up inch by inch. I lost my shoe because something took it off me, not violently. A deliberate touch. The way you take off your own shoe to leave it by the door. At the top, I rolled onto my back and stared at the sky. I didn't cry, which surprised me. My brain had gone to a place where it was very interested in clouds and the shape of the birch leaves. My leg tingled like it had gone to sleep. When I looked at my sock, it was clean. No mud, not even damp. My pant leg was clean too, except for dust from where Aunt Lynn's hands had grabbed it. The hole behind me didn't look like a hole. It looked like a dark spot the size of a dinner plate. We sat there a long time, breathing like people do when the thing that was going to take you back to your parts has decided not to for now. We didn't file a report about that. We didn't tell Earl. We didn't tell Tash. I think we didn't tell each other except by the way we stopped going near the hill when we didn't have to. I finished out the week because quitting midweek felt like giving the hill a win. When Friday came, I told Aunt Lynn I was out. She hugged me like she was proud of me for not making her plead. I went back to stocking shelves and pretending. The hum of the refrigeration units was comforting because it was a man-made sound and therefore obedient to switches. Month later, Aunt Lynn mailed me a copy of the city notice that no new interments would be allowed in the back section until further notice due to subsoil instability and ongoing site assessment. That's one way to say a place is breathing. Earl retired in August and moved to his daughter's place near Portland. The Merritt family took out a small notice asking for privacy and stopped answering questions. The police never called back. I know because I called them and left my number in a voicemail that probably got deleted by a guy who thinks cemeteries are like any other park with stones in it. I don't blame him. I want his version of the world most days. 2 more small things and I'm done. The first is that 3 weeks after I left, I came home to find an envelope slid under my apartment door. There was no stamp, no return address, just my name. Inside was a piece of paper folded into quarters. I stood looking at it for a long time, like unfolding it would change me into the person who had his shoe taken off by a hill and written warnings. When I opened it, there wasn't a warning. There was a rubbing, like the kind you make with a pencil and paper over a grave. It was an angel's face from Birch Hollow. I recognized the crack in the stone across the cheek. At the bottom, in neat, plain handwriting, it said, "Please stop walking so heavy. The second thing is a dream," except it didn't feel like a dream. And I hate when people say that because all dreams feel real when you're in them. In mine, I was standing on the back hill with snow on the ground that hadn't actually fallen yet that year. I was the only person there, but the hill wasn't empty. Under my feet, the ground expanded and contracted slow and sure. When it released, I could feel pockets open, spaces where air moved, and in each space there was a breath that didn't belong to mine. Not a chorus, not a crowd, just individual breaths, people asleep in a house you grew up in. I didn't see faces. I didn't hear words. I had the awful and peaceful understanding that what we put in the ground in Birch Hollow isn't alone, and that we are the ones who insist on names and lids and lines because it keeps us from falling through our own floors. I woke with my foot cold to the ankle, like I'd stepped in a snowdrift barefoot. My shoe was at the end of the bed, neatly placed. The laces were untied. I moved out of Bangor in the fall. I don't go out of my way to drive past cemeteries now. When I have to walk across soft ground, I test each step like it's offering me a choice. I was embarrassed to tell anyone what happened because it's not a story that gets you sympathy or a GoFundMe. It gets you looks and a lot of air pocket talk. So this is me writing it down for the first and probably last time. If you ever find yourself out near Birch Hollow on an early morning, when the humidity makes the trees look like they're exhaling, stay on the gravel. If you feel a rhythm under your shoes, don't keep time with it. Don't be rude to it, but don't match it either. Walk light. Apologize if you need to. If you hear something under your floorboards at night that isn't pipes or a cat, wait a second before you call someone. Press your palms flat against the boards. Listen. If you ever dig, and I hope you don't, And if you find nothing where something should be, and if there is a note, and it says stop digging, don't argue. Some places don't want to be opened all the way, and some are already open. Taking the long, slow breaths that keep them from collapsing. Keeping what's down there comfortable without letting you see. We take care of the land because we like to say it belongs to us. It's a nice thought. It might even be true in towns with clean grids and new sidewalks. But in that corner near the hill outside Bangor, the ground belongs to itself. And it breathes. I'm not writing this to scare you, and I know how that sounds when someone starts a story like this. I'm writing it because I can't sleep more than an hour at a time, and because the sound in the walls of my apartment won't stop. It's quiet like a teaspoon tapping the inside of a coffee mug from far away. The maintenance guy swears my pipes are fine. I moved twice. It follows me. If anyone from the county or the company reads this and recognizes the job, I'm not naming names to get sued. I'm naming them because they were there. If you worked the line outside Odessa last summer, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm a safety hand. Nothing glamorous. I'm the guy who tells you to put your ear pro back on and fills out near-miss forms nobody reads. I was on a pipeline expansion crew just west of town. Roll of scrubby land between a trucking yard and a pecan orchard that somehow survives out there. Always dust on the leaves. We had a mixed crew, a couple of welders, an excavator operator named Luis who'd been doing it since before I was born, a foreman named Cal who drank black coffee from a thermos he never washed, a handful of laborers rotating in and out. Background people, good people, the kind who remember birthdays by bringing kolaches. The first day we found it, the sky had that filtered glare West Texas gets. White hot and flat, where you can't tell time by the sun, because everything is bright at once. We were trenching near mile marker 19 away from the road noise, just the excavator's idle growl and the constant ping-ping-ping of the heat in the metal. Luis eased the bucket into the soil and the machine bucked like he'd hit caliche, and then everything stopped. We thought it was a boulder. Happens all the time and you curse because rocks never show on the survey like you want. But when we brushed the dirt off, it wasn't stone. It was iron, not rusted out farm junk like you sometimes hit. This was, I don't know how to say it. It was iron the way a brand new wrench feels dense whole. The edges were rounded like somebody had ground them down. No seams at first glance. It was about 4 feet long, maybe 1.5 feet across, tapered at one end. Luis tapped it with a crowbar and everyone heard it. Hollow. Pipe? Hank asked. He was our driller, visiting the trench to heckle and bum smokes. Pipe doesn't have corners, I said, because along the top you could feel 4 very slight angles. Like a coffin pressed out of clay and then hammered until it was soft. You thinking what I'm thinking? Cal asked. We all were, but nobody wanted to say coffin on a worksite. You don't want to be that guy. You don't want to be the guy who calls the sheriff because you made a mistake either. So we cleaned around it careful with shovels and hands. The top was smooth and cold. And I mean cold. People use cold loosely out there. Everything is either baking or freezing. But this iron was cold like something from a walk-in fridge. The air burned our knuckles with heat, but the metal took the heat away, drank it. We got enough dirt off to see welds. Not visible decorative welds, not modern factory welds, but these tight, intentional seams like someone took infinite time to make them neat. Nate, one of the welders, ran his finger along one and nodded like he was appreciating art. He whistled. Somebody loved this. We called it in. Sheriff's deputies came first, then a guy from the county coroner's office, then 2 people I'd never met from the state, both of them with clipboards and polos. They took pictures. They had us clear the site for an hour. Artifact was the word they used, which made no sense because artifact means old pottery or arrowheads, stuff you can display in a case. This wasn't delicate. It was heavier than anything its size should have been. It took 3 of us in a chain to get it onto a skid so they could forklift it onto a flatbed. We were told to keep working 100 yards down, which is funny, because you can't not watch something like that. So we watched the loading and we watched the sun, and we watched the way the iron stayed dark while everything else bleached. I remember the moment I saw the teeth. Not then. Later. I'll get to it. The rumor that spread before lunch was simple. Small coffin. Nobody said child, not out loud, but the shape told the truth. You can tell yourself it's a dog coffin. You can tell yourself it's old country superstition. You can say it's a prank. But when the coroner's guy knelt and pressed his palm to the iron like he was listening, and then he stood up a little too fast and wiped his hand on his pants, the grown men in work boots shuffled. Nobody wanted to have their back to it. I filled out a hazard report because that's my job. I wrote unknown container and possible biohazard, and I used the corporate phrases. Cal told me, "Good thinking." Both of us knew it didn't matter. The iron coffin went to evidence storage at the county office. That's the phrase the deputy used, evidence storage. As if we had a crime. The story should end there. It didn't. That night I dreamed in a way I haven't since I was a kid with a fever. You know when you dream and you can't move your hands right, like they're not sized for what you're trying to do? I was trying to hold a small latch. I could see the tiny loop of iron and my fingers were too big. Someone on the other side was tapping. I woke up with my hands cramped. Nails clawed into my palms so hard I had half moons all day. The next morning, Becky from Records came by the site with her lunch in a brown bag. She was tight with Cal and knew everyone. She works in the county building, down the hall from evidence storage, it turns out. She said, "You boys here?" "Thing's gone." "What thing?" Luis asked, like he didn't know. "The iron kid," she said, immediately embarrassed at her words. "The iron box. They signed it in yesterday afternoon. Door was locked, cameras on, and this morning the cage had a dent in the bottom and the box is gone. I heard it from Marisol, swear to God." She saw the empty pallet. We laughed because the choices were laugh or swear. But the laughter felt wrong. Nate made some crack about scrap thieves and oxygen acetylene torches, and Becky didn't laugh. "It was cold," she said, "when I walked past last night. The hallway was cold and the AC wasn't even on. That afternoon the radios went weird. Static is normal. We work next to heavy equipment and out in nowhere. But this was not normal. It sounded like, not voices exactly, patterns, like someone tapping a spoon on a table in Morse code. We joked about it. Hank did the thing guys do and knocked on his hard hat like, "Hello?" Too many of us knocked back. Cal had me file a note about the radio interference. I did the forms, took my photos of the trench. When I was crouched near the spoil pile, I noticed metal dust on my boot. You get metal dust near welders, sure. But this was like graphite, silvery and fine. When I brushed it, my hand smelled like old pennies. That night I got up to pee and heard something in the wall of my apartment. Tap. Pause. Tap, tap. Same pattern for a long time. I opened the cabinet under the sink because logically that's where the pipes are, and if there's tapping, it must be pipes. The wood was cool to the touch. It's summer in Odessa. It shouldn't be. I didn't sleep after that. I watched those online videos where the narrators talk slow and clear and swear it's true. I've listened to those voices for years like white noise. People in weird situations, yards away from danger they don't recognize yet. I used to think most of it was kids telling stories. Now I think some of them are like me, too scared to tell anyone face to face. Easier to confess to strangers. On day 3 after the find, the pecan orchard guys came over yelling about stolen tools. Their shed on the far edge had the hasp bent outward like an animal tried to get in. They had a pile of sockets missing, and an old lathe the owner's father had inherited from his. No footprints, just this fine residue on the floor that left prints when you walked through it. Rust maybe, but lighter, and it shimmered. They called the sheriff. The deputy who came was the same one from the site, and I watched him look at the residue on his boots like he didn't want to bring it into his cruiser. I could list all the strange things. Let me. It will feel random, but it wasn't then. The safety cones we set by the trench, the ones with reflective strips, went cold enough that water beads formed on them at noon. You could press your cheek to one and feel relief like shade. They warmed again when you looked away. The excavator keys disappeared twice. We locked the cab the second night, and the lock looked fine in the morning, but the key was gone and the cap on the diesel tank was gentle warm, like a hand had rested there. A stray dog, a blue heeler somebody had dumped, would not cross that stretch of dirt. He bristled and whined, staring at the edge of the trench, and then made a sound I didn't know dogs could make. I've heard coyotes hurt dogs, dogs in fights. This was dog crying for a person, and then he ran like he had remembered an appointment. Becky got sick at her desk and came out in the heat shaking, teeth chattering. She said she'd dropped off files by the evidence room and her fillings felt like ice. The orchard owner's grandson came by with a toy car and let it go at the top of the trench slope. The car should have gone down and hit the bottom. It stopped halfway and rolled back toward him. He didn't cry. He just looked at me and put his finger to his lips, and I don't know how to explain that to you without it sounding like a fake detail. He shushed me. A 6-year-old. Like he knew that whatever was listening liked quiet. On day 5, the state people came back. They had a flatbed with a fabricated crate, the kind lined with foam, and none of us knew why, because the thing that needed crating was already gone. They talked to Cal and walked the trench with clipboards, but didn't let their boots touch the bottom. They kept their hands tucked into their armpits like they were cold. The taller one asked for our full names and dates of birth, and I gave mine, because that's what you do when someone with laminated credentials asks. He handed me a card that said, Department of Cultural Resources, which is not something I'd heard of in Texas, and I was going to Google it later, but I kept putting it off. If I had looked then, maybe I'd have a different ending to this. That night, I dreamed about an eyelid. I know that's specific and weird, but I dreamed about a child's eye. The lid sewn open, the thread shiny and dark like oil on a puddle. The eye did not blink. It couldn't. So the pupil jerked back and forth like a fly under cling wrap. I woke up with my eyelids stiff and salty, and I had to rinse them with cold water. When I looked in the mirror, the whites were shot with red so fine it looked like hairline scratches. On day 6, we were supposed to tie in the new pipe to the existing line. Standard procedure. Welders prepped the bevels. Nate cracked a joke about babies with metal teeth. He apologized immediately, like the kind of apology that lives under the tongue, ready for later. And then his hood light went out. He flipped it off and on. The other welder, Jesse, laughed and said, "Batteries." And then the sound started. If you've never stood on a steel line when something inside is moving, you don't know the sound of the world with a throat. It's a long, thin hum, the tiniest bit of grit carried along like something crawling inside a harmonica. We all froze. It wasn't gas. You know the sound of gas, you hear it every day. This was not pressure. It was contact. It was a utensil dragging the inside of a pipe. Tap. Pause. Tap, tap. The same pattern. With a little variation like a lullaby someone hums without thinking. I told everyone to step away from the line because the only way that sound makes sense is if something is about to fail. And failure on a line can be fatal. Cal backed me up even though his face was white. We pulled back to the trucks. The sound kept traveling. You could feel it in your soles when you stood on the dirt, and you could hear it in your teeth if your mouth was closed. When it passed under us, the heat let up for a slit of a second. Then the sun landed again. Hank, of course, did the dumb, brave thing. He climbed onto the pipe, lay down, and pressed his ear to the steel. He smiled like an idiot because sometimes men are still boys who want to say later that they were the one who did it. Then he flinched. He sat up so fast he knocked his hard hat off. He didn't talk for a minute. When he did, he whispered. Hank never whispers. It's not in English, he said. What's not? I asked, though we all knew. The song, he said. It's a song. We shut down for the day. The state people put on a show of making phone calls. The deputy who'd been out 3 times told Cal, off to one side, that he didn't want to put anything else in writing because the last report had gotten attention. I heard that phrase and wanted to stop hearing things forever. That evening, when I went to put the lock on the equipment cage, my hand brushed metal that wasn't there before. Inside was a small, perfectly shaped rod like a knitting needle but heavier. Iron. The tip was blunted, not sharp, and the handle had shallow notches like finger grips. It was warm, not hot. Warm like a body. I called Nate over and he looked at it and shook his head. Old, he said, which is not a technical term but felt right. He didn't want to touch it. Neither did I, not again. We put it in a plastic tote and wrote "Found Object" on a label and stuck it to the lid and set it on Cal's tailgate. In the morning, it was gone. The label was still stuck to the metal like it had been peeled carefully and pressed onto the tailgate itself. People will say we worked ourselves into a superstitious sweat. Maybe. But then tell me why the worker from the orchard, quiet guy, named Arturo, brought over a handful of what he called baby teeth, polished little chips of metal he'd found in the dirt at the edge of the orchard where the old irrigation pipe runs. They weren't teeth. They weren't like teeth. They were thin wedges in the correct size and curve. He put them on a paper towel and all of us leaned in and nobody touched them. And then the sun went behind a cloud and we all flinched because we suddenly remembered shade exists. 2 days after that, Becky didn't show at lunch. Cal called her. No answer. Later that afternoon, she pulled up fast with a look I've only seen on people stopped at night by troopers. She got out without taking her keys and told us, "Please don't tell me. Please don't tell me anything." Which made no sense, and then she cried and apologized and said she needed to tell somebody. She said last night she heard tapping in the wall of the records room while she was finishing a filing backlog. She knows the old building creaks. She grew up in this town. She isn't a jumpy person, but the tapping came from inside a specific shelf. When she put her ear to the wood, it sounded like it was inches away. She pulled the shelf forward and the tapping stopped. In the dust behind the shelf there was a clean pattern, like small lines dragged through dust evenly spaced, like something with a small mouth had gnawed and then swept. She said she saw her breath. I told her not to go back in that room alone. She nodded. She said she wouldn't. She went back. She always goes back. That's how records clerks are built. You're waiting for the part with the mummified child. I'm sorry I don't have that. That's what drove me crazy after. Not having the moment you can point to and say it started here and ended there, this happened and then this. It is not a movie. It's an accumulation. We kept working because that's what you do with permits and schedules and men who need hours. We moved the tie-in point a mile down, away from the weird stretch. The tapping followed, slower now, as if it was learning the new route. We'd hear it some days and not others. It was worse at night when we were home. At least half the crew admitted to dreams of cold metal and small hands. Nate started wearing a chain with a saint's medallion under his shirt. Luis put salt on his doorstep. Hank started bringing his dog to the site, and the dog refused to get out of the truck. On a Tuesday near the end of the month, the line pressure read wrong. Cal sent us out in twos to check valves along the last installed section. I went with Jesse. The air felt carved. That's the only way I can say it. Like you could bite a chunk out of it and it would hold the shape. We stood at a valve and listened to nothing for a long time. The way you listen to silence when you've been hearing something too long. "Do you hear it?" Jesse asked. "No," I said, and realized that was worse. He reached down and touched the valve body. He snatched his hand back. "Cold," he said softly. "Like a freezer coil." I put my palm against the steel and flinched. It was cold enough to feel like wet ice without the wet, and under my hand something thrummed like a heartbeat. Too fast for that, and then slow, and then fast again. We took pictures with my phone. In the photos, the valve looks like a valve. In one, the air above it shimmers. I tried to show people later. They said it looked like heat distortion. They were right. Except this kind crawled down, not up. It happened then. The climax, if you're waiting for the shape of a story. Jesse was leaning to look at the weld and he slipped. It was my fault. I should have told him to clip his lanyard to the post. He caught himself on the line and there was a sound like teeth clacking on a glass. He didn't move. His eyes went wide and careless tears came out of them because his body thought it had been hurt. I grabbed his vest and hauled him back. His glove was stuck, just for a second, to the iron like a tongue on a winter fence post. When it came free, the palm was frosted white. We both screamed a little. We both pretended later we didn't. He didn't have frostbite. How could he? He had a round mark on his palm that didn't blister, but stayed tender like a mouth had kissed him too hard and left bruise in negative. He didn't go to the doctor because of men and because of no insurance. He rubbed it with antibiotic cream and it smelled like metal for a week. That night the tapping got louder. Not just at home, in cars, in the drawers of our nightstands, in the vents. We texted each other updates like you do during severe weather. Hearing it in the bathroom wall now. Kitchen cabinet, truck bed, inside metal toolbox. The pattern wasn't random anymore. It had a shape we recognized without knowing why. A rhythm like lullabies. The stupidest thought I've ever had came then. It was practicing. The day after that, the orchard guys found the old irrigation pipe had been lifted out of its trench in 3 places and set neatly beside it. No tire tracks, no drag marks, like it had unzipped itself and lain down. They didn't call anyone. They buried it again with a backhoe and pretended it stayed there. I went to the county building to see Becky. I told myself it was to bring her kolaches. I think it was to stand in a place with thick walls. She looked like she hadn't slept. She smiled because she's kind. I asked her, "Is it worse here or is it just us?" She said, "It's everywhere." Then she said, I don't think it's trying to hurt us." "What then?" "I think it wants to be held," she said. and then covered her mouth with her hand because the word scared her. I mean, it wants hands, it wants attention, so how do you know? Because when nobody pays attention, it taps, and when you listen, it stops. We made eye contact and both of us looked away. You might think we stopped the job, locked the gate, called a priest. We kept working. The line went in. The tie-in happened. The pressure test passed. The crew rotated out in 2s and 3s, and the state people stopped coming by, and the deputy didn't answer texts. The orchard put up a for sale sign, and the blue healer disappeared. The dog food bag on the back porch stayed full. The county never put out a press release about the missing iron coffin. Why would they? Who would believe it? Becky said the report in the system is locked. You need special credentials. The last entry is a note that says transferred to state, but there's no signature. When she clicked the file info, the timestamp changed to the current time even though she didn't edit it. She put a strip of tape over the file cabinet keyhole because it made her feel like she could do something. 2 months later, the tapping got softer. I thought maybe it was over. You can get used to anything. The sound moved down into the floors, then into the sink pipes, then once into the steel support column in the parking garage at my apartment complex. People leaned on their cars and tapped back because they thought a kid was messing around. You know how city people get about noises in garages? We tap back. We make it a game. I quit the job when it was done and took a different one up near Lubbock. New start, new town. The first night there, the pipes in the motel tapped and I laughed out loud and had to put the pillow over my face to quiet myself. It's not funny. It's funny like funerals are funny when the priest mispronounces a name and you can't breathe because you'll scream if you don't laugh. That's where I am now. Different apartment, different town, same sound. Quieter. Patient. I hear it when the kettle is on and when the AC kicks and when the neighbor's kid drops a spoon. I hear it under podcasts, under the whine of tires on the loop, under my own voice when I answer the phone. I started putting towels under the bathroom door like I could keep the noise out, and it worked for a day until I realized that if it wants in, it's already here. It's in the iron of the bed frame. It's in the springs of the couch. It's in the studs. It's in my fillings. On a cold morning last week, I breathed out and saw steam, and it smelled like old pennies. Sometimes I think about the way the coffin looked when we first brushed it clean. That blank iron, no handles, no adornment. The weld's neat and careful. You only take that kind of time when you're hiding something you want never to break open, or when you love what's inside more than you love yourself. I wonder who did it. I wonder if they were sick or desperate or kind in a way that got twisted. I didn't see the child. None of us did. We heard it. We felt it pass under our boots. We dreamed what we dreamed, and we carry what we carry. I tell myself the teeth were just the orchard's idea of a joke. I tell myself metal doesn't warm with wanting. I tell myself Becky's files are just files. The human brain can put a person in anything. We see faces in outlets. We hear songs in static. I know this. I say it like a catechism. It doesn't help. Some nights the sound builds to where I can't pretend it's pipes. It moves like thought. I knock back because I'm weak. Because I want it to know I'm listening so it will stop. And for a second it does. Then the tap comes from a new place. I put my head against the wall, and in that small pocket of contact, I feel the same thing Jesse and I felt on the valve. Too cold, then warmth like a hand, then the barest hint of something moving far away in a tunnel and getting closer. Not walking, not crawling. Pulling along by the teeth, biting, swallowing distance, tiny, patient, learning the language of everything hollow. If you work a line near Odessa and find something that makes your hands cold in July, call someone. Or don't, it won't matter. If you're like me and you hear tapping at night, don't tell yourself it's the pipes. Or do. Maybe the truth is worse. Maybe it is the pipes. Maybe the pipes are singing because something small and careful and loved is making its way along them. Toward any place someone will stop what they are doing and lean in to listen. The man in the apartment next to mine has a baby. Sometimes when the tapping starts, the baby stops crying and you can hear her breathing, like she's listening hard. The last time it happened, I held my breath with her. And in the long stretch of silence, I pictured a small eye that cannot blink. Watching the dark and learning the rhythm of our lives. And a mouthful of polished wedges practicing a lullaby it doesn't yet know the words for. I am writing this because I can't sleep and because when the tapping starts again, and it will, it always does. I want a record somewhere that says we found a small iron coffin in the dirt outside Odessa, and inside there was a body with eyelids sewn open and teeth made of metal, and the coffin disappeared from evidence storage 2 days later. That part is simple. The rest is happening in every wall I've leaned against since. If you hear it, don't knock back, or do. Just know that all you're doing when you answer is teaching it the time between your taps, the distance across your room, the shape of your quiet, the way you sound when you hold your breath. They told me not to dig under the cedar, but I only half listened because the work order said we had to replace the irrigation line, and the line ran right beneath that tree. This was last spring, late April, in a small town outside Hickory, North Carolina, Catawba County, where the red clay stains your socks and the local news is mostly about high school baseball, yard sales, and bad storms. I was working part-time for the county's historical preservation program, which sounds fancy but mostly meant I was the guy hauling brush, cataloging headstones, and trying not to damage any of the older markers when the backhoe hiccuped. The cemetery sat behind a brick church off a 2-lane road that went quiet every weekday around noon. If you stood on the rise next to the church kitchen, you could see the white stones rolling down to a stand of pines, and beyond that a band of kudzu threatening to swallow the back fence. The church ladies cooked casseroles and watched us from the fellowship hall window. Someone's radio played old country real low. It was that kind of job, that kind of town. There were 3 of us on the crew. Me, my friend Levi, who ran the mini excavator, and a groundskeeper named Mr. Mott, who was 70 if he was a day and knew every grave by name and family. "We don't cut roots under that cedar," he told me first thing, tapping the tree with his boot. "Old line runs crooked here for a reason." The cedar was thick, its trunk as wide as my chest, with branches that formed a dark umbrella over a cluster of markers from the early 1900s. The earth bulged a little on the downslope, a sag like a smile pressed into the ground. I'm not saying I ignored him. I marked the section off and moved the flags. But the county inspector came that afternoon and frowned at my plan and told Levi to trench the original path. Levi nodded. He's a nodder by nature. And then he set the teeth into the clay with that hydraulic purr that makes you think you're slicing butter. The cedar shivered but didn't drop any needles. Mr. Mott shook his head and walked away. We hit the corner of a coffin around 2 feet down. The backhoe's bucket snagged it and lifted a piece like it was peeling a tin can. It didn't smell the way you think. It smelled clean, like wet pennies. We shut everything down and called the sheriff and the pastor, which is the order Mr. Mott insisted on. And then we stood there looking at the sliver of old wood and the dark rectangle of disturbed earth, like kids who know they're in trouble. Sheriff's deputy took statements. Pastor took off his hat and said a prayer. We waited for the medical examiner, a woman named Dr. Mercer who drove up from Newton and had the focused expression of someone who never lets a small town rattle her. She set up a collapsible canopy to keep the sun off the site and started talking about context, and strata and archaeological, respect, which I guess is code for you idiots. Shouldn't have dug here, but now that you have, we'll do this carefully. We'd nicked the corner of the coffin, so they exposed the rest by hand. I watched, sweating under the handkerchief tied at my neck while Dr. Mercer brushed away the last layer. The wood was odd, thicker than I'd seen, with black iron nails instead of modern screws. The lid was split lengthwise where the backhoe caught it. They pried the slabs apart like opening a chest. Everyone went quiet. Inside there was a woman. I don't mean bones. I don't mean a crumpled dress and some teeth. I mean a woman like she died last week, not 100 years ago. Her face was pale and taut, lips pressed together, hair pinned back with 2 simple combs. The dress was dark and high-collared with small, even buttons. There was moisture pooled in the base of the coffin, and the smell hit us then, sweet, fatty, like old soap and wet coins. Dr. Mercer murmured adipocare and saponification, words that felt as heavy as what we were looking at. "Do not touch," she warned. As if anyone were going to, Mr. Mott crossed himself. The pastor cleared his throat and started another prayer and then faltered halfway. The deputy took a step back, boot sliding in the clay. Dr. Mercer took photographs. She looked at the hands, which lay neatly folded on the chest. The fingers were wrinkled like she'd been soaking, the nails clean. I remember this detail. There was a hairline crack in one thumbnail, a thin smile-shaped line, like she'd once slammed a drawer on it. I left that night thinking maybe they'd make us stop the project, and in a way I hoped they would. You don't unsee a face like that. You carry it home like mud on your boots. By morning, the county had already decided this was a historical anomaly and also a small public relations crisis. We got told to hold all work except for the removal of the remains in a respectful, minimally invasive manner. Dr. Mercer came back with an evidence tech and a pair of special bags and a man from the state with a clipboard. Mr. Mott told me the old markers near the cedar were for a few mill families and 2 children who died of diphtheria. He pointed to an unmarked patch between 2 stones. There's one right there I always thought was a space, and he said, just a feeling. Folks didn't always afford headstones. They lifted the woman out. She was heavier than you'd think from the moisture and the chemical changes, and they had to brace her neck with rolled towels. I stood far enough away to pretend I wasn't staring. Her collar had a tiny tear at the top buttonhole, a crescent like a snag. When they took her, they left the coffin open, and that's when Dr. Mercer pointed to the bottom where the wood had slumped and darkened from years of seepage. This coffin isn't as old as the headstones around it, she said to the man with the clipboard. Early 20th century. Metal hardware consistent with 1910s, 1920s. It was a guess, but it stuck in my mind. That night I sat on my porch and Googled adipocere and learned more than I wanted to about how bodies can preserve under certain conditions: cold, wet, low oxygen. It didn't make me feel better. It made me ask the question I would end up asking too many times. How did she get there? And why was there no stone for her? 2 days later, we hit the second coffin. Levi wasn't even digging near the cedar. He was trenching toward the fence line when the soil caved into another void. We stared at the dark hole, then at each other. Dr. Mercer came back, exasperated now, set up the canopy again, braced the sides, and had us haul the dirt by hand. It took 2 hours to expose enough to be sure. The wood was almost gone, more suggestion than structure, the metal nails rusting to orange powder. When she pried it open, there was nothing recognizable. Bones, yes, but slumped and jumbled. Shreds of cloth like wet leaves, no face looking back. I felt relief, if I'm honest, and then a guilty tightness in my chest like I'd dodged something but left the bullet lodged nearby. Dr. Mercer worked quietly, soft brush, little trowel. The evidence tech bagged each bone. I was staring at the earth under the ribs, dark, heavy clay, when the deputy leaned in, peered at something in the mud, and said, "Wait, Doc, look at this." He pointed at the fingertips. You couldn't call them fingers, not exactly. More like phantoms of where fingers had been, dark cavities edged with a waxy grayish lining. "That's unusual," Dr. Mercer said, and then she said, "No, hold on." She had the tech fetch her little sample kit. They swabbed and scraped, and I went off to fetch bottled water because the deputy looked faint. They kept their voices low, but not low enough. Words drifted over to where I stood. Preservation, print quality, I've never, and finally Mercer's voice, careful and flat, saying, "We'll send them to AFIS. See if we get anything at all." Probably nothing. The mill families from the church came by in the afternoon because news crawls on the red clay faster than kudzu, and the pastor did a better job with the prayer this time, like he'd practiced. We were told to keep working around the canopy, which felt like digging in your own living room, while someone rearranges the furniture of your dead. That weekend, I drove to the county records office in Newton and asked if I could look at burial records from the 1920s. The clerk was a woman with a pink reading light clipped to her desk and a sweater, even though it was 70 degrees outside. Her name tag said Darla. She watched me flip through the flimsy index cards and then pushed a black notebook toward me, its pages full of names and dates looping in elegant pencil. I didn't find anything for an unknown woman in that decade. 2 babies, both named, a farmer, a veteran from the Spanish-American War, but no unnamed woman. When I said as much, Darla pursed her lips. "Get yourself over to mill registry," she said. Back then, the mill had its own records. Even births. And sometimes, to get a job, they took your handprint so the foreman could pay whoever showed up. My granddaddy told me. She scribbled an address on a scrap of paper. An old textile office converted to a small museum. I went. The museum was closed, but the back door was open because an old man was dragging a display case across the floor with the determination of someone who refuses to wait for help. He introduced himself as Leonard and didn't ask too many questions when I told him what I was looking for. He'd been a foreman in his day. He unlocked a file cabinet and slid out a drawer of brittle time cards, each stamped with a name and, just like Darla said, a smudged oval where a thumb had been pressed into ink and rolled against paper. Not official, Leonard said, but we trusted the thumb. I spent 2 hours flipping cards. The names read like an old church bulletin. Huff's, Bagwell's, the occasional Irish or German wedge in the Bible Belt lists. A quarter through the drawer, I found it. A card with no first name, just M. Reese, and a thumbprint so crisp I could see the whorls. The year was written in pencil, 1923. Missing pay, Leonard said, peering over my shoulder. Crossed out. Maybe she died or left town. Sometimes you lost folks to the fever. Sometimes. He didn't finish. I took a photo of the thumbprint on my phone. I don't know why I felt like I needed to. I should have asked permission. Leonard didn't scold me. When I got home, there was a voicemail from Dr. Mercer asking if I could come by her office the next morning, in person. The message was brief enough that I got that low stomach drop you get when a doctor calls with results. I didn't sleep much, and I knew it had nothing to do with me, which is the part that bothered me most. Her office was a boxy room with a map of the county and a freezer that hummed in the corner. She poured me black coffee and then slid a manila folder across the table. We ran the fingers, she said. First set, from the preserved remains. A match popped in the state database and then in a historical overlay we maintain for unidentifieds. It shouldn't have. We don't usually get anything that old. She pointed to a printout of a digitized card, Catawba cotton and thread, with a brown thumb smudge perfectly captured. Mill record, she said. Belongs to M. Reese, female, no first name given. Sometimes they used a maiden initial or a married initial. The match score is, well, it's as good as modern, like it was made yesterday. I leafed to the next page. Another photo, this time of what I realized were the scraped gray rings from the second coffin, somehow coaxed into visible loops and arches. Partial but sufficient, she said. They match M. Reese too. 2 remains. Same person. That can happen? I asked, and my voice sounded thin in the cold little room. Like, same person, 2 burials? Some paperwork mistake and they buried her twice? That doesn't make sense, she said softly. Even in 1923, the church kept records. She paused. It can happen the other way around. 2 people under 1 stone. A family does what it can afford. But this, and the preservation, and the absence of a marker. She let it hang. On her desk was a plastic bag with a tiny comb inside, one of the hair combs from the preserved woman's hair. The teeth were clean, the plastic faintly yellowed. Not plastic, she corrected when I said so. Celluloid, early, flammable. I thought of the cedar's shade and how cool it had felt even at noon. Someone buried her twice, I said. Why? Dr. Mercer shrugged in a way that didn't match her eyes. I can tell you something else that doesn't help. The preserved remains, there's dirt in the nasal passages, fine particles consistent with that clay. There's also lacerations on the fingertips, like she was moving in there before everything's set. She cleared her throat. We'll be careful with the wording when we file. I went home with the folder burned into my brain and sat on my porch again, listening to the whip poor wills, feeling the way you feel after a nightmare when you haven't woken up properly. I kept seeing her hands folded so neatly, nails clean, that hairline crack in the thumbnail. I kept imagining those fingers scraping wood in the dark. Levi called me that night. His voice was low, like he didn't want his kids to hear. Mott says there's a story, he said. Pastor told him at the fish fry. 1923. A girl from the mill died of a fever. They buried her up there near the cedar because the ground stayed cool. Then there were complaints. Folks said they heard knocking. You know how people are. Kids dared each other. The pastor back then dug her up to put her in a better coffin and found, he trailed off. So they did it again. Put her in another box and marked the spot wrong or something. I don't know. Did they put her in 2 coffins? I asked. At the same time? Depends on who you ask, Levi said. Mott said his granddaddy wouldn't go near that cedar after dark. He told him if anyone asked, that tree was planted on purpose to keep the ground cold. I didn't sleep. I don't like when stories fold back on themselves like that. It feels like the universe clearing its throat to say something you don't want to hear. The church decided to re-enter both sets of remains properly. The pastor announced it on Sunday. A correction, he called it. They arranged for a new marker with M. Reese, 1900-1923, Est, and a small cross carved above the name. Dr. Mercer asked me, only me, to carry the preserved woman at the ceremony because I'd been the one to see her first. That felt like superstition disguised as duty, but I said yes. I'm not brave. I'm not even especially respectful. I'm just the kind of person who doesn't want to be the reason something feels worse. It was a gray morning. The church ladies in their floral dresses, Mr. Mott in his only suit, Levi and his wife, the deputy, Darla from Records, which surprised me but shouldn't have. Leonard from the museum stood near the back, hat in his hands. The pastor spoke gently and vaguely. We lowered both sets of remains into the same grave, this time in a reinforced vault with a rubber seal, 21st century respect layered over 20th century mistakes. I was the one who felt it. I guess because I had my hand on the handle of the preserved woman's bag. A tiny vibration transmitted through plastic and flesh and my palm. It could have been the rope sliding. It could have been my pulse. It could have been wind. That's what I told myself later. At the time, I almost jerked my hand back. Levi squeezed my arm, not because he felt it too, he didn't, but because my face must have gone white. We lowered her in. The pastor nodded at me like he knew a secret, and I wanted to ask him right then, who told you to dig her up the first time? Why did you put her back down twice? After the lowering, we stood around whispering and pretending to talk about casseroles. Mr. Mott came up to me and said, I was wrong about that cedar. It weren't planted to keep anything cold. He looked toward it. It was planted to mark the boundary between the two places. He didn't explain, and I didn't ask, because some men in their 70s like to leave you with a sentence you'll carry home and unwrap alone. That night, the knock started. I don't mean at my door. I don't mean on my window. I mean under my house in the crawl space where the ductwork ticks at night and raccoons sometimes scratch. It was 3 knocks, slow, like someone politely asking for a glass of water. I lay there staring at the ceiling, counting my breath, telling myself it was pipes, telling myself I'd finally let the story in. It came again the next night and the next. Always 3 knocks. Always between 2 and 3 in the morning, when the highway went quiet and you could hear the trains through town if the wind was right. On the 4th night, I went outside with a flashlight. My yard smelled like damp grass and the neighbor's hibiscus. The crawlspace hatch was undisturbed. I crouched and listened. Nothing. A dog barked 2 streets over. Levi called the next day. Crazy question, he said. You hearing anything at night? I keep waking up thinking someone's at the door. He laughed. The way you laugh when you want the other person to say it's not just you. 3 knocks like that. Hannah says I'm dreaming. I didn't say anything, but I heard him listening for my silence. A week later, Darla from Records dropped off an envelope at my house. Her pink reading light wasn't clipped to it, just a post-it. Found this in Personnel Addenda, 1923. Inside was a typed memo on yellowing paper from Catawba Cotton and Thread to County Coroner. It said, in stiff language, that the matter of Monsieur Reese had been resolved in cooperation with the church, that the burial had been rectified, that any further inquiries should be directed to the undersigned. It was signed by someone whose last name I couldn't make out because the ink had bled. In the margin, in pencil, someone had written, "Do not disturb further. Twice is enough." I took that envelope to Dr. Mercer. Her office felt colder that day, like the freezer was working harder. She read the memo and sat back, arms crossed. "It's nothing," she said, and then, "It's something. It means they knew. They did it intentionally, but why? Why twice? Maybe she was buried alive the first time," I said. "They reburied her to make it." "I don't know." "Right. That doesn't make it right," she said, and I watched her eyes move to the plastic bag on the shelf where the comb sat like a tooth. "You know what I hate?" she said quietly. "We still don't know her name. We have an initial. We have her work. We have her prints. We don't have the thing that lets the pastor say her full name in the room." That night, the knocks didn't come. I slept like I'd been knocked out. In the morning, I woke to a voicemail from the pastor asking if I could meet him at the cemetery. I drove over in the mist, the kind that sticks to your eyelashes. He was standing by the new marker, hands clasped. He looked smaller without a congregation. "I found something," he said, and led me behind the church to a narrow closet under the stairs. It smelled like old hymnals and mothballs. He handed me a Bible, black leather cracked at the spine with dates penciled inside the front cover. "We don't use this one," he said, "but it's been sitting there since before my time." He flipped to the front. Between marriages and deaths, someone had written in a neat hand missed names. Under it, M. Reese.
Rice, Fev, and then a date in 1923 I won't write here because it's probably someone's birthday.
Fev might have meant fever. It might have meant February. It might have meant something else. There was a tiny cross beside it and a second fainter pencil line. Moved, spring. We stood in the closet breathing dust. The pastor whispered, "Sometimes a thing that isn't supposed to happen happens in a way you have to handle without telling anyone what it was." "Is that in the Bible?" I asked before I could stop myself. He laughed once, humorless. We left the closet door open. He insisted on a prayer by the marker. He said M like it was a whole name. He said Reese like he was sure of it. He asked for rest, and then he asked for forgiveness for the people who had tried to tidy the past by rearranging a person. I started to feel better, which is a dumb sentence, but true. The knocks didn't come for 2 nights. On the 3rd, I woke at 2:17 a.m. to the sound of my doorbell. That was new. I put my bare feet on the floor. The boards were cold. I walked to the front door. My porch light is on a sensor. It clicked on. The porch was empty, the railing shining with dew, the street beyond puddled with moonlight. I stood there a long time waiting for something to move at the edge of the yard. A rabbit darted across the neighbor's brick walkway and disappeared under their azaleas. In the morning, I found 3 small crescents scratched into the paint of my door near the knob. Not deep, not enough to go through the paint. 3 neat half-moons, bright against the cheap white latex. I pressed my thumb next to them without meaning to, and for a second it looked like the 4th mark completed a pattern. My thumbnail has a hairline crack in it right now, a thin white arc from where I closed a van door on it last fall. I noticed the crack lined up. I painted over the crescents. Levi said the knock stopped at his place after they put the new marker in. He said Hannah stopped complaining about something tapping the headboard at night. He said Mr. Mott told him the cedar had a ring of mushrooms around it now, and he'd never seen that before. And did I think that meant we'd disturbed something or put it right? I said I didn't know because I didn't. Darla found me at the hardware store a week later, standing in front of the paint chips like you do when you aren't sure what you're doing, but want to look like a person who plans projects. She slid a small manila tag into my hand. It was a piece of card punched with a hole at one end, yellowed and stiff. On it in blocky rubber letters it said Reese M. The hole was torn like it had once been tied to something with twine. Was stuck in the back of the Bible, she said, already walking away. Under the cloth that keeps the communion set from tarnishing. At night I keep the tag in a drawer next to my bed. I don't know why. Maybe I'm the kind of person who thinks names matter. Maybe I'm the kind of person who hopes a drawer is a kind of grave for the things you can't say out loud without changing the temperature of the room. It's fall now. The cedar turns a darker black green and the air under it feels cooler than the rest of the cemetery by a few degrees if you stand there past noon. The new marker gleams, the letters precise, the dash between 1900 and 1923, est, giving me more trouble than the parentheses. I stand there sometimes and say the letter M in my head until it feels like a name. You can make a lot of names out of that letter. Margaret, Mary, Mildred, Mabel, Maddie, Marjorie, May. Sometimes I go to the museum on my lunch break and look at the time cards. Leonard lets me stand there as long as I want. I don't know what I expect to happen. Maybe I want the ink to rearrange into something legible. Maybe I want the thumbprint to smudge finally, like ink should when you press it, and time does what it does to everything. 2 weeks ago, I crawled under my house to check for a leak. The flashlight beam cut a slice through dust and cobwebs. Near the far corner, where the foundation curves by the azalea, I saw 3 small indentations in the hard-packed earth, each the size of a fingertip, evenly spaced. They could have been from a raccoon or from settling or from kids messing around with a stick through the vent. They could have been nothing. I backed out slow because my heart had gone stupid. I put the hatch back and sat on the grass and watched clouds slide past the moon until my breathing felt like it belonged to me again. You want me to say I'm imagining it? That would sit better, wouldn't it? It sits better with me too when I manage it. But some nights the air feels thinner and the dark has the thick consistency of mud, and I swear I can smell that old sweet metal scent like wet pennies. I lock my doors the way everybody does when a story has entered their house and found the room where they keep their sleep. This morning, Mr. Mott told me the cedar will need trimming before winter because the branches are starting to weigh down the older stones. He said the roots are probably spread far and deep in the cool layers. I told him we'd do it next week. He tapped his boot on the ground right over that old sag and said, "You ever think about how fingerprints are just circles trying to close around something?" I said no, because who thinks about that, and he didn't answer, and we both looked at the marker with the name that's not a name. The dash in the middle felt longer than it was. If you drive past the church late, you can see the cedar as a darker shadow against the hill. The wind sounds like it's washing through a hollow. And if you park with your engine off and the heater clicking as metal cools, you might convince yourself you hear a knock somewhere. It doesn't make sense to hear a knock like under your seat, like under the road. You'll tell yourself it's just the sound of roots growing, of water moving in old pipes, of a story settling into the place your head keeps for things that are both explainable and not. I don't know why she was buried twice. I don't know why they didn't write her full name. I don't know if the knocks were her, or if the human brain just gives itself a rhythm when it's afraid. I only know that when I carry the comb in its bag to the pastor's office so he can decide what to do with it, I swear it warms in my hand like it's been sitting in sunlight, and when I put it down, I have to resist the overwhelming urge to straighten it, to fold its teeth under something heavy, to keep it from catching on anything ever again. The county closed the project in August, with a tidy report that says the cemetery is stable and the new irrigation line runs where it should, and all unintended disturbances have been resolved. It's probably true. The backhoe doesn't hiccup anymore. The cedar stands where it stood in April. The hill still rolls down to the pines. Last week, after a rain, I walked the perimeter to check for washouts. Near the back fence, where the kudzu never quite gives up, I found a small piece of metal half buried in the clay. I pried it out with my pocket knife and wiped it on my jeans. It was the head of an iron nail, black and flaking, the kind we'd seen in the first coffin. The top was stamped with a faint loop like the start of a letter. If you wanted to see an M, you could. I put it in my pocket. I carried it home. It sits on my dresser now, next to the manila tag and a map of the county where I've marked the church with a dot drawn darker than all the other dots. The nail leaves a faint rust ring on the wood I haven't cleaned. Maybe because some stains are as close as you get to a reliable record in a place where the paper failed. I know this isn't satisfying. You want answers, we all do. If you need one, take this. Sometimes people try to make a mistake right by doing it twice with better materials and softer words. Sometimes they plant a cedar to make a border where there isn't one. Sometimes a body holds on to the world like soap holds a smell. And sometimes the world holds on back in little ways that wake you at 2 a.m, with the sure knowledge that someone is politely asking to be let in. You don't have to. You can pretend you don't hear it. You can lie very still and count the seconds between the knocks until you fall asleep, and wake up with your window full of ordinary light. I'm trying to sleep with the ordinary light. Most nights I manage. I keep the nail and the tag in view because it helps to know the past is heavy and small at the same time. I walk past the cedar and count the rings on the mushrooms and tell myself they're just rings. Nothing closed, nothing complete. On the new marker, the cut stone is already catching dust. The dash stays the same length. The name stays mostly a letter. That feels like a compromise the living make with the dead that the dead don't have to agree to. If you ever come through Catawba and want to see it, go during the day. Park by the fellowship hall with the slanted roof. The church ladies will look at you from the window if it's Tuesday. Walk down the hill and count the stones. Don't step on the bulge spots out of habit. If you stand under the cedar and listen, you'll only hear the highway and the breeze in the branches and your blood in your ears making shapes out of quiet. That's what I tell myself anyway. And if, later that night, your porch light clicks on with nothing beneath it, and you find 3 small crescents by your doorknob that you don't remember seeing that morning, paint over them. Trust the paint more than you trust your memory. Sleep with a fan on. When you wake up and the world is just the world again, you'll think about the nail and the tag and the comb and the line we put between 2 dates when we aren't sure about either one. And maybe you'll feel what I feel. Not fear exactly. Not relief either. Something like standing on a church hill with your boot on ground that gives a little when it shouldn't. Knowing there's air where there wasn't supposed to be any. And a name that almost was. Twice. I moved back to Easton, Pennsylvania last fall because my sister needed help. And because my rent in Philly was a joke I couldn't keep laughing at. Easton is one of those towns where the past sits on your shoulder whether you want it or not. Brick row homes. The Delaware and Lehigh meeting like they're whispering, and the big hillside cemetery with its old angels, tilted obelisks and oaks that drop acorns like marbles. I grew up here and always told myself the cemetery didn't bother me. We used to cut across it to get to College Hill parties. At 17, headstones are just scenery. This time, I came back at 31 with an air mattress and a box of frying pans. And the first thing my sister Tasha told me was, "Don't hang your clothes outside at night. The cemetery dew leaves stains." I laughed and said dew is just water. She said, "It's the smell. It sticks." A couple weeks in, I picked up a volunteer gig at the Easton Historical Society because I was between shifts and I liked the feeling of getting my hands on something older than my problems. They were cataloging donations from an old funeral home that had closed. Ledgers, calling cards, a stack of stereoscope cards in a shoebox. Stuff like that. A quiet job with a radio murmuring in the background and a retired librarian named Marla, keeping track of who took breaks too long. She was the one who first mentioned the iron coffin with the window. They'd bring them up the river, she said, brushing dust off a ledger like it was gold leaf. Iron coffins, sometimes with a glass panel so the family could see. Airtight. It was modern at the time, healthier. People were scared of bad air. She tapped the ledger. "There's an entry for one in 1874, plot number 3E19. The name rubbed off ages ago, which is a shame. We're doing a preservation day with the cemetery grounds crew. You like weird stuff? Come see something weird." I said sure because at the time, weird felt like a safer word than unemployed. On preservation day, I met the cemetery people. Men in green jackets, a woman with a ring of keys big enough to anchor a boat, and a groundskeeper named Hanley who had been there forever. The cemetery chapel sat halfway up the hill, cool and echoey. Sun fell in through the stained glass in long square beams. They had a few restoration projects underway, cleaning lichens off stones with soft brushes, resetting a base that had tilted and, yes, carefully excavating a 19th century iron coffin they'd located with ground-penetrating radar. The coffin had been face up in a shallow depression, like a fish lying in a stream bed, and when they cleared the soil, we could all see the small oval of thick glass set into the lid like a ship's porthole, cloudy with age. I know the moment I'm supposed to describe as the beginning of the story, and it wasn't that. It wasn't the crowd leaning over the coffin and muttering. It wasn't Hanley telling us the lid was sealed and wouldn't be coming off that day. It wasn't even that the glass looked somehow wet from the inside. It was the way my breath tried to match the fog on the window. Like some old instinct woke up in me and wanted to warm the other side. We all went home with the kind of excited fatigue you get from doing physical work near something important. The plan, Marla said, was to move the coffin into the maintenance shed by the driveway, closer to the road, less risk of drop-in vandals, until a conservator could stabilize it. They put boards down and lifted the coffin with straps. I watched them for a few minutes and went to get coffee with Marla afterward. She kept reciting procedurals like she had to convince herself things were in order. Chain of custody. Contact the state. Get the press release drafted. 2 days later, I got a text from her. They'd opened it for a preliminary review when the conservator arrived early. Then a second text. "You won't believe this." Then a third with a photo. The coffin was empty. That's not a twist. That's what happened. Or what we were told happened. The lid was off. The oval of glass unbroken. The inside lined with rust and something like oil. No bones, no clothes, no fragments. But at the top, where the glass met the iron, the ring was smeared with moisture. Not a random film. Fingerprints. Hanley swore he hadn't touched the glass. The conservator, a woman named Corinne with delicate hands, said she hadn't either. "We wouldn't touch the interior," she said, upset. "We use mirrors and lights. This is contamination." She said contamination the way you'd say betrayal. "It's just sweat from the movers," someone said. "From inside?" Hanley asked, and no one answered. We stood in the shed with the door rolled up, the cool, damp air of the cemetery coming in like a tide. I saw what the photo didn't capture. The prints weren't clean. The moisture had gathered and run, making dark little tails like raindrops on a windshield. When you looked longer, You could see that the 5 pads of a hand were pressed into the ring almost exactly where you'd put your palm if you were trying to push the window out. They angled inward. The smears ran toward the glass. I had a stupid thought about static cling, about how condensation forms where there's a temperature differential. It didn't help. Look, Marla said. She wasn't pointing at the prints. She was pointing at the oval of glass itself, at the tiny scratches around the edge. They were not random arcs. Each scratch had a pairing opposite it, as if the window had been tapped from both sides. Tap, tap, tap. Corinne said it was probably a vibration in transit, traffic, tools. She made a note and asked for everyone to clear out so she could document properly. I left with my knees buzzing. On the way home, I kept wiping my steering wheel like my hands wouldn't dry. You can Google iron coffin with a glass panel, and you'll find articles. The windows were called viewing panes. At the time, people were afraid of being buried alive. They liked to look. This was one of those facts that used to be trivia to me, like an oddity in a museum. It didn't feel like a museum anymore. It felt like something in a room with me, and I couldn't turn my back to it without wanting to look over my shoulder. I slept with the bedside lamp on for no reason that night, and when I woke up, I could smell that damp metal smell like pennies rinsed in a sink. I told myself to stop. My sister was already carrying enough. The reason I'd come back to Easton at all was because she was finishing a paramedic cert, and our aunt, who raised us, had a minor stroke. We took turns staying with her. At Aunt Deb's apartment, the windows are old and loud, sliding up with a bit of a scream, and the sheer curtains drift when the radiator ticks. That night they drifted and stuck to the glass as if someone outside breathed a long, foggy breath. "Don't pull them," Tasha said. "Those rods fall off for no reason. I hadn't touched them." She looked at me like she knew I was somewhere else in my head. The next day I went back to the cemetery because I had to see the coffin again. Hanley let me into the shed and scolded me for not wearing a mask, not gloves, as if an hour earlier I'd been the kind of person who remembered masks and gloves. The prints were still there, darker now, like the moisture had reacted with something in the metal. Corinne was gone. Her light kit still sat on the workbench. There was a little crust of dried mud on the concrete where the coffin's feet had been. "Where's the records?" I asked Hanley. "Whose coffin is this?" He shrugged. "We got an index card system that's barely a system," he said. "There's a plot map, but the name's worn off on the stone. Water got in years ago. We may never know. People think graveyards are neat as a pin. They're not. They're like junk drawers with nice handwriting." I was standing close to the coffin, and against every rule I leaned in. For a second, my reflection in the oval window was so faint it looked like someone else. A face pale and thin, as if the glass scraped it thinner. My lips looked parted. I took a step back so fast I backed into a rake. "You okay?" Hanley asked. "Yeah, sorry, I'll get out of your way." He wiped at the metal with a cloth. "If it were me," he said, voice low, "I wouldn't touch the window. Not even to wipe it clean." He didn't look at me when he said it. He said it like a message he wasn't supposed to deliver. I told all this to my friend Ben later at Two Rivers. He's one of those photographers who actually photographs things, not just weddings. He used to shoot bridges and factories at night when we were kids. He offered to go by the cemetery after dark and get some long exposures of the shed and the coffin, if the window was visible. I told him there were cameras, and anyway, why? He shrugged and said, "Because this is when you lean in, not out." We went after midnight. There was frost in the grass that snapped under our sneakers. We didn't go in the shed. We set up outside and shot the stone chapel with a streaky sky, and the modern city glowed down by the river. I'm telling you this because it was the part that felt normal. Two friends doing something dumb but not illegal, trying to put the ache in your chest into a frame. Ben showed me a 30-second exposure where the stars made short dashes, and in one window of the chapel there was a smear like a face. He left it up longer. Another shot. The smear became an oval. I told him that was just the light from his phone bouncing weird. He held up his hands. "No phone?" He walked closer to the chapel. "Don't go inside," I said. "The door's locked," he said, and tugged on the handle to prove it. It was locked. He pressed his face to the glass and cupped his hands around his eyes. "The gate into the nave is chained. I can see the shed through the side window, though. There's a light on." We weren't the only ones out there. A pair of teenagers in black hoodies walked along the road and tried to act like they weren't staring at us. A fox crossed the path, low and quick. From down on 611, a siren rose and fell like a test pattern. Then, This is how it started for me instead of around me. The inside of the chapel window fogged. Not outside, where our breath white flashed in the cold air. Inside, in a steady round bloom, a breath the size of a face. Ben had leaned in so close his nose almost touched the glass, but this bloom was lower. He didn't see it at first because his own breath fogged the outside. I tugged the back of his jacket. "What?" he said, impatient. I pointed. The bloom on the inside faded as if something had pulled back. Then another bloom, small and high like someone's mouth pressed against the pane right under the lock. We were both quiet in a sudden, exact way. The kind of quiet you hear before a thing slides. The kind of quiet that has weight. "It's a draft," he said. "It's warmer in there." "It's colder in there," I said. We didn't run because it wasn't that kind of fear. It wasn't sharp and it didn't give instructions. It was thick and slow, and it felt like standing in the mouth of a tunnel. We left when a police cruiser did a slow loop. We nodded like normal citizens and went home. Ben texted me one photo later of the chapel window and the small pale oval where something had fogged the inside. He wrote, "See?" I didn't reply. I put the phone face down and couldn't stand having it on the table like that. So I slid it under the couch cushion. 2 days after that, Marla asked if I'd sit with her at the shed because she didn't want to be there alone while Corinne finished paperwork. "Tell me stories," she said. "About anything else." I brought coffee and showed up. Corinne wasn't there when I arrived, but the shed door was cracked open and the light on. I pushed it wider and called hello. There were 3 wet oval fog marks on the coffin glass, like someone had leaned in and breathed 3 times and then waited for an answer. "Hello?" I said again, dumber. "Back here," Hanley called from behind the shelves. He emerged holding a clamp. His face looked like he hadn't slept. "Corinne's late," he said. "Road detour." Then he saw the glass and went quiet. He took a photo himself, shook his head, and walked back out into the daylight like he needed air. Marla came a few minutes later, and the 3 of us stood around like we were on watch. That's how it felt. Not guarding something, but like we were waiting for a boat to finally make it all the way to the dock. The wind shifted. The smell in the shed got stronger, not rot, not exactly rust, but something like the inside of a radiator. Old heat. I kept rubbing my fingertips together. They felt tacky, the way they do after you peel a sticker off glass and can't get the residue off. I mentioned it and Hanley said, "Yeah," in a way that made my scalp feel too tight. Sometime in that hour, while we were all in the shed, my phone lit up in my back pocket. I took it out. A face looked back at me, or what my brain insisted was a face even though it was really just a fog pattern on the lock screen background. 5 crescent smears with a larger smudge below, like a handprint in someone's open mouth. I wiped it with my sleeve and the fog reformed in the same place, crisping at the edges where the oil from my skin already lived in the microscopic scratches. "Static," Marla said, but her voice trembled. Corinne never showed. She texted hours later that a pipe at her studio had burst. We sat until dusk and then locked up. On my way out, something pressed against the back window of my car from the inside. Not hard. Just enough to fog a small soft oval as if someone was in the back seat trying not to be seen. I didn't look, I drove. I only looked when I got to Aunt Deb's and could turn the car interior light on and make the world small and defined. The fog was gone. In the back, Aunt Deb's Tupperware of potluck rolls sat on the seat like they were mocking me for losing my mind. I slept on the couch and dreamed of water and windows. In the dream, I was in the river, face up, and an oval of glass was above me like a skylight. It wasn't attached to anything. It floated just barely on the surface, and my breath gathered on it and slid off, and I couldn't wipe it away. I woke up gasping and didn't realize my hand was on my own mouth until my fingers came away damp. This is where I tell you something I didn't tell anyone for a while. Years ago, when I was still in high school, a boy went missing after a party on College Hill. They found his jacket by the stairway down to the river, but not him. People said he fell in. People said he ran away. He'd been the kind of boy who took things apart. Radios, bikes, a lawnmower once, without always wanting to put them back together. He kissed me once in the chapel when we were so drunk we could have swallowed the moon. He put his hands on the glass of the side door and laughed at his own fogged print. He's not the same as what I'm telling you now. I know that. But the memory has the same shape and temperature. And my brain keeps trying to push them together like 2 magnets that don't attract. Ben called me the next day and said, "I have an idea and you're not going to like it." He wanted to put a camera in the shed. Not a big one, just a small wildlife cam with motion detection. We could clear it with Hanley, he said. We tell him it's for vandals. Because honestly, if someone's messing around, I want to be the one who catches them. I wanted to say no. I said yes. Hanley rolled his eyes, but agreed. One night, he said, I don't want to explain this to anybody. I don't want to write it down. If something goes weird on that camera, we're deleting it, clear? He said it like a prayer. We set the cam on a shelf angled at the coffin. We went home. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. Motion detected. I opened the app and watched in grainy black and white as the shed door creaked in the wind, and the square of light from the street lamp shifted. The coffin sat. The oval of its window was a flat moon. 30 seconds passed. Then another alert. Another clip. This time the coffin window wasn't flat. There was a shadow across it like someone had leaned over it. It moved. It was too soft to be a person, too slow to be a trick of the light. It slid down until the oval was almost fully eclipsed. If you've ever watched someone wipe steam off a mirror with the side of their hand, you know the shape I mean. Ben texted, I'm going over. I texted, don't. He said, meet me. I didn't want to, but if I stayed home and something happened to him, I would be the one who decided not to go. I met him at the gate. The air had a wet cold that made your teeth feel hollow. We walked up the drive. The shed was dark. Hanley must have cut the power. He said one night, I whispered. Ben had a key to the padlock from Hanley. He used it. The door rolled up. The smell hit me again, old heat and something else like a low tide. Not rot, not sewage. A clean kind of stink. The coffin sat in the middle like an anvil in a cartoon. My eyes adjusted. There were marks on the glass. Not fog this time, dry streaks. They looked like someone had run a fingertip around and around the inside edge of the oval until the oil drew a pale wreath. Stop, I said, even though he wasn't moving. As I said it, we both heard tapping, not from the coffin. From the far wall, tap, 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 Ben swung his light. The wall was just pegboard with tools hanging like instruments waiting for a player. The tapping moved. Tap at the window. Tap at the door. Tap from the coffin finally, not the glass but the lid. Small, searching. Ben breathed. It's pipes. He doesn't lie well. He put a hand out and set it on the coffin like he was calming a horse. His handprint fogged the glass from the inside. That is the hardest sentence in this whole thing, and I wish I could explain it away. He put his hand on the iron around the oval. On our side. And on the other side, under the glass, a perfect fog handprint bloomed where his palm would have been, mirroring him. The fingers were longer than his. They were set a little too far apart. They didn't match. They were a reply. I don't know why I did what I did next. Maybe I wanted to prove it was a trick, like touching an electric fence because you need to feel it to believe it's real. I put my own hand on the iron a few inches over. Another fog handprint swelled to meet mine. My skin went cold, like someone had pressed ice against me from the other side. The glass didn't move. The coffin didn't move. Whatever touched me did not hit or grab, it rested. It was patient. I jerked my hand back and in doing so knocked my knuckles against the glass. It made a dull sound, not like a bell, like a deadened tap. A soft tapping came back immediately in time with my pulse. Tap, tap, tap. I backed up into the workbench. A hammer slid and hit the floor. Ben said my name and then stopped saying anything, which is somehow worse than yelling. He showed me his phone. The camera app was open. In the live view, the coffin looked normal. The room looked normal. But the oval window was black, and in that blackness there was a faint sheen like water seen from below on a cloudy day. From the angle of the shot, we should have seen our own faces reflected in it. All I could think was, that's what it looks like when you look up from under something and hope they'll see you. Something started to breathe. Not labored breathing, controlled. Long inhale, long exhale. It didn't sound like it came from the coffin or the door or a specific point. It sounded like the room was breathing. I'm done, I said, and Ben nodded. We backed out together, rolled the door down, locked it, and walked, not ran, because walking felt safer. Like you keep your back straighter and your steps even and you live. At the gate, he put his hand on the iron and we both watched the metal fog for a second, just a second, as if a piece of cold glass were inexplicably floating an inch away and answering him. We didn't tell Hanley. We told ourselves that we were protecting him, that we'd delete the footage like we promised. Ben hit erase in the app and then went home and called me 10 minutes later to say it didn't delete. It just moved the clips to a trash folder he couldn't empty. He put his phone in the freezer like a superstition. I laughed at him while I put mine in the microwave, not on, like that would keep signals out. We are idiots. We are also animals that like doors and lamps and dry places. The next morning, my aunt asked if one of us had been standing outside her window at 2 a.m. The sheer curtain had stuck to the glass again. I heard tapping, she said. She demonstrated it on her coffee mug. Tap, tap, tap. Like a little bird. No, I said. No one was there. You don't have to lie to be kind, she said and patted my hand. I can't explain why I went back one more time. Curiosity is just a word we use to make our compulsion sound pretty. I went at noon. The shed door was open. Hanley was there with 2 other men I didn't know. They were arguing in low, tight voices. The coffin lay where it always lay, but the oval glass was gone. It wasn't broken. It was missing. The ring where it had been was clean and wet, as if something had been pulled free and set down somewhere else. There was a faint impression of a circle on the workbench where dust had recently been disturbed. Vandalism, one of the men said. That's what the report will say. Hanley looked at me and then looked at the coffin and then looked nowhere. We're storing the rest of it at the chapel for now, he said. Less attention. That night it rained hard. The kind of rain that bounces. The Delaware looked thick and brown. Water sheened off every surface. When I got into my car, the inside of the windshield fogged immediately, which makes sense when it's cold and damp and you bring your wet body into a small space. But this was different. 2 handprints appeared near the top of the glass, spaced wider than mine, fingers longer. Those same 2 separated fingers, like someone was holding onto the edge to look in. I turned on the defroster. The handprints stayed for a second and then streaked down as if they slid. I drove to Tasha's. I didn't tell her about the handprints or the missing glass, because she had an exam to study for and her hair was still damp from the shower and she wore the sweatshirt I stole from her in high school that says Lafayette across the front in cracking letters. We watched a show where people buy houses. In one of the scenes, the couple toured a place with a big picture window, and when the camera panned to the glass, there was a brief, pale oval on it that wasn't a reflection of anything in the room. It was on the inside surface. I blinked and it was gone. I told myself it was compression from streaming. The last time I went to the cemetery, it wasn't to the shed. I walked along the bottom road near the receiving vault. There's a slope there where a line of iron railings leans like old guardrails. I stopped because I saw a small circle of water in the gravel, perfect as if a bottle had been set down and lifted again. I touched the middle of the circle with my index finger. It was cold. It wasn't just damp. It was as cold as the inside of a pipe. My breath fogged. Not the air. Me. I pulled my hand back and there was a ring of condensation on my skin like I had pressed it against a window. I don't sleep much now. It's not fear exactly. It's listening. I listen to the radiator and the elevator cables and the rain in the downspout, and I hear tapping in all of it. Tap in the phone when I lay it face down. Tap in the bathroom mirror when the shower steam crawls up it. Once I wiped a long streak off the inside of Aunt Deb's hallway window, and a second later another streak formed. Exactly the same length, exactly the same place, as if I were looking through a sheet of glass and someone on the other side had a cloth that mirrored mine. There's a reason I haven't been back to see Ben in person. 2 days after the camera night, he texted me a photo of his front door. The little half-moon window had fogged in the shape of a face, but not a face like you see in clouds when you want to see something. It was the oval of it that got me. The exact oval, the parted space where a mouth would be. He said, "It doesn't wipe. It's like it comes from the inside of the glass." I didn't answer because what do you say? We still text. He pretends to talk about new lenses. I pretend to talk about jobs. If you go to the Easton Cemetery now, you won't see anything out of place. The shed is locked. The chapel is quiet. The coffin is probably tucked somewhere on a shelf with a tarp over it. The oval glass is wherever things go when nobody wants to know where they went. They'll tell you the story like an anecdote. There was an old iron coffin with a window in it that got found. And when they opened it up for preservation, the body was gone. But there were fingerprints on the glass from the inside. People's eyes get big. They nod. They tell it at parties. It turns into a story about history being spooky. That's not the story. Or it isn't anymore. The story is that the glass is the part that knows both sides, the part that lets your breath show, the part that remembers. The glass is the door that never needed a key because all you have to do to open it is fog it up and press your hand there and wait for someone to match you, and then wait for them to keep matching you in every other window you own. It's getting colder again this week. The first hard frost is due. In the morning, everyone's car will be etched with fern patterns and kids will draw smiley faces in them before school. And some of those faces will be drawn on the inside. And some parents will scold and say not to touch the glass. And some people will turn on their defrosters and see the shapes sink and run. And a few will have this sudden, terrible, deep-bone understanding that their glass isn't a wall. It's a surface with two sides that can answer. I'm writing this on my sister's laptop at her kitchen table because my phone won't unlock. It keeps making the shape of a handprint right where my thumb tries to read. 3 times now I've watched the moisture gather and fade right over the sensor like it's breathing with me. And I can't get in because it isn't my print. Not exactly. It's longer. The gaps are wider. It's patient. It has all the time in the world. If I cup my hands on the screen like I'm a kid pressing my face to glass, the fog forms to match the curve of my palms and holds there like I'm not alone. There. It just tapped. Not loud, not sharp. Just a small, steady sound that knows exactly where I am. Tap, tap, tap. I'm posting this because I need someone to tell me I didn't make the whole thing up in my head. I know how that sounds, but I'm serious. If anyone from Nye County happens to read this, you probably already heard some of it. Rumors bounce around quick in a town as small as ours. Just understand I'm not trying to start anything or cash in on a story. I just need sleep. I need the clicking in my head to stop. And if writing it down does that, I'll take the downvotes and the fake comments and all the rest. My name doesn't matter. I live in Pahrump, Nevada. It's a place people mostly pass through on their way to Vegas or out into the desert. We have a small museum, if you didn't know. 2 squat buildings joined by a breezeway, white stucco that looks almost sterile under the sun. The Historical Society runs it. That's where I work. Night shift. I check doors, watch cameras, make sure nobody climbs the fence, and spray paints the stagecoach out front. It's easy work. It was, anyway. This started last spring, a Tuesday, in April that smelled like rain even though the forecast promised dust. A rancher named Tate found something on the edge of the dry lake bed behind his property, south of town. He was out checking a fence line disturbed by ATVs, and his boot went through a thin crust of soil. The ground there is strange, hard, then suddenly soft as flour. He looked down and saw bone, not an animal. He recognized a human ulna from the way it was shaped. He said he almost threw up when he realized it. Then he noticed cloth, too, and not the shredded stuff we usually find wrapped around old trash. This cloth was neat, intact, like it had been folded yesterday. Sheriff's deputies came out and the county coroner and then the state archaeologist because of the uniform. Everything moves slow because that's the speed of rural Nevada when a discovery doesn't equal money. But once word reached the museum, our curator, Ms. Carmichael, got involved. She loved the phrase collection of local significance, and she knew how to use it to move the right gears. By Thursday, the burial was brushed out carefully, photographed, measured, and this is where it gets weird, lifted with the cloth still pristine. The archaeologist kept saying impossible under her breath. The nameplate on the cross, because there was a cross made of old mesquite, half charred, was burned clean. Not faded, not worn. Scorched smooth, like somebody had held a hot iron to it until even the impressions of letters were erased. They dated the grave by what else they found tucked into the uniform jacket, a brass button, a paper scrap that disintegrated when air touched it, and a coin minted in 1879. The uniform was Army, that much they were sure of. It shouldn't have been there. There's no record of any battle near us, no fort in that exact spot, no reason for a soldier to be buried alone in the flats miles from town. Because the gravesite wasn't a cemetery, and because the land belonged to Tate, and because he didn't want ghost hunters and YouTubers, he agreed to let the museum take the remains and the uniform temporarily for study and respectful display. That's Ms. Carmichael's phrase too. Respectful display. She's good at making things sound okay. They brought everything in on a Friday, right before my shift. I watched them roll the climate crate through the back door. I remember the smell, which wasn't death. It was cleaner. It smelled like old gun oil, faintly metallic, and a leather that isn't leather anymore but still pretends to be. They set the crate in the prep room. I kept telling myself it was routine. We've had remains before, Native American reburials mostly, treated with prayer and transfer. But this was different. The jacket, the trousers, even the boots, all of it intact, new as a photograph. The skull and long bones laid carefully beside it like a patient waiting to be dressed. My co-worker Luis was on with me that night. He's younger than me, more cheerful, listening to a podcast in one earbud. He stuck his head into the prep room and whistled. "That is creepy, man. Look how real the stitching is." "It should be real," I said. "It is real. You know what I mean." "Close the door," I told him. "No one's supposed to be in there after hours." We did our first sweep. The museum at night is not like the museum during the day. The daytime crowd leaves a kind of warmth behind, fingerprints on glass, the muffled chatter of kids getting scolded for running. After midnight, those sounds are gone, and what you hear instead is the building itself. AC ducts popping, the metal gates over the gift shop blooming and contracting with temperature, a faint tick that seems to move from room to room. You learn what is normal. You learn to ignore it. At 2:55 a.m., I was in the security office, which is basically a converted coat closet with monitors stacked like a low-budget newsroom. Luis was making microwave ramen. The screens showed all. The usual angles. The entrance hall. The diorama room with the bison, the mining exhibit, the breezeway, the staff corridor, prep room. Nothing moved. At 3:12 a.m., the third monitor from the left fuzzed. It was the camera that looked down the hallway outside the prep room. Static crawled for a second, like ants. It settled. The hallway looked empty. I glanced at the clock, then back. At 3:14 a.m., the sound started. Soft, measured, like somebody in heavy boots walking across polished tile. Only we don't have polished tile. We have concrete floors with scuffs and a dark carpet runner that swallows footfall. The steps were too clear for that. I checked the mic inputs, thinking maybe the audio had switched to the breezeway, where the echo could fool you. No. Source read, North Hall. Luis came in with his soup, the lid peeled back. "You hear that?" "Yeah." We both stared at the monitor. Nothing on screen. Just the hall, dim and blue. But the sound, step, 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 got close, then passed. Your body knows when something walks right beside you, even if you can't see it. Hair on your arms lifts like the room has a draft. We both turned to the open door of the security office without meaning to. The steps stopped at 3:17 a.m. "Someone's messing with us," Luis said. He tried to grin, but his mouth didn't commit. We did another sweep. We checked every door. Locked. We checked every window. Secure. We checked the hallway where the sound had come from. Nothing. I crouched and touched the floor because the air felt cooler around my ankles. The concrete was cold in one patch, then normal a few feet away. No AC vents there, no reason. We went back to the office and tried to act normal, but when the steps started again the next night at 3:14 and stopped at 3:17, it didn't feel like a coincidence. Not to me. I wrote it down in the log, even though it made me feel stupid. 3:14, 3:17 a.m. Unidentified steps, North Hall. No visual. Luis sketched little boots next to the note. By Monday, word spread among the staff that the uniform was going on quick display. "Just for locals," Ms. Carmichael said, smiling the way people do when they're already thinking 10 steps ahead. She and the textile conservator mounted the jacket and trousers on a mannequin and placed the boots on a small platform beneath. The bones remained in storage, carefully wrapped. There was talk about contacting the army, about protocols. Everyone was very professional. No one mentioned the sound at 3:17 except me and Luis. The first night the exhibit opened, nothing happened during visiting hours. People filed past, peered, took phone photos that never look as good as your eyes. The uniform inside the glass. Case looked handsome, if that word can survive in a conversation like this. The wool was almost luminous in the museum lighting. There was no name on the small placard, just unknown U.S. Army enlisted man, circa 1879. Ms. Carmichael wanted to put the burned nameplate next to it, but the archaeologist said not yet. The steps started again at 3:14, as precise as a watch. They came from the entrance hall this time, across the polished concrete, which suddenly did sound like tile, past the gift shop, down the north hall, and then stopped in front of the case. I didn't see anyone on the camera, but I saw something else. A blur like heat above a grill, moving fast and then still. For a second the glass fogged, a circle of breath on the inside. Luis swore under his breath. Nope. He pushed away from the monitor and paced into the hall with his flashlight already on. Part of me wanted to stop him. Part of me wanted to keep my hand on the door jamb and see if it felt cold again. He stood in front of the case. From the security office, his light made a cone on the glass. He turned and gave me a thumbs up. I was about to tell him to come back when we both heard it, the soft scrape of a heel turning. Then the measured cadence walking away down the hall toward the prep room. Luis swung the light around. It washed over empty space. The sound turned again sharply into the staff corridor, and then it ended at 3:17, like someone hit a switch. We recorded everything. We saved the audio. The next day we played it for Ms. Carmichael, expecting an eye roll. She didn't roll her eyes. She got very still. "That's a boot heel," she said after a minute. That's not building noise." "You hear the turn?" Luis asked. "The pivot?" "Yes." "What do we do?" "Nothing," she said too quickly. "We do our jobs. We don't call a local news crew. We do not tell rangers on Facebook. We monitor. We collect data." Luis wanted to joke, but he didn't. I wrote in the log again. The third night it changed. The steps started at 3:12 earlier by 2 minutes and came from the breezeway, which is open to the air on one side. Wind rattled the shade slats and the chimes somebody left near the back door. The boots moved slower, heavy. They crossed into the museum and stopped at the case. The fog of breath appeared again, this time higher, like someone leaning close to read. Then something knocked inside the case, just once, a dull sound like a knuckle on wood. We ran. We tell each other not to run in the museum because you can trip over a display stand and end up on the floor with a broken tooth. We ran anyway and nearly collided in the dark because the lights go to motion sensors after hours. By the time we got to the case, the glass was clear. The boots sat on their platform. The jacket's left sleeve had shifted slightly, like it had been tugged. It's funny, the things that tilt you from "this is strange" into "this is wrong." For me, it wasn't the sound or the fog. It was that the left sleeve, which had been pinned slightly forward in a museum's careful way, now hung straight. I know how hard the conservator worked to make it look like a gentle bend. I know it didn't undo itself. I told Ms. Carmichael again the next morning. She listened again. Then she told me the detail I didn't know. When Tate found the grave on that Tuesday, April 9th, the deputies and archaeologist arrived and started their process. They logged time of discovery at 3:17 p.m. They kept noting the weird coincidence. The wristwatch of one deputy stopped at that exact time when he knelt to take a measurement. They laughed about it. They also did one thing Ms. Carmichael said she regretted. "I made them bring the uniform first," she told me, "before the bones. I thought textile conservation would be the greater emergency. The bones could wait one more night. So the first thing removed was the jacket and boots," I said. She nodded. "At 3:17, I remember because I wrote it on the intake form." She swallowed. We've already made a blueprint." "Of what?" "Of a path. The fourth night, every motion sensor light in the north hall flicked on at once at 3:14. There was no recorded movement on the camera to trigger the first light. No insect, no moth shadow, nothing. But they all popped awake in sequence like dominoes. Then came the steps. Entrance hall, down the corridor, the pause in front of the case. The fog circle appeared precisely where a face would be if a man of average height leaned in. Then slow, like someone thinking, the blur moved to the right to the small placard on the wall with "unknown" in bold. It stopped there for several seconds, then went back to the glass. The sound of a soft, frustrated exhale came through our tinny speakers. You're hearing that too, Louise said. I am. I did something I shouldn't have. I spoke out loud to the empty hallway. We don't know your name, I said. I'm sorry. Louise stared at me like I'd crossed a line you don't cross. But the exhale came again, softer. And then the steps moved away. They went toward the prep room, through the staff corridor, and all the lights in that narrow hall flicked on as if someone walked beneath them. The footsteps stopped at 3:17. I took that time and made it a ritual in my head. It felt like a clock ticking toward judgment. I read back over the intake forms. 3:17 p.m., uniform removed. 3:17 a.m., noise at the museum. I thought about Tate, how he'd said the cross over the grave looked burned. Not weathered. Burned intentionally, the name scraped out by heat. I thought about how someone wanted that name gone and how maybe what we had pulled out of the ground didn't like being labeled unknown twice. Humans like patterns. It's how we make sense of things that don't make sense. That doesn't mean the pattern isn't there. On the fifth night, the boots inside the case had moved. I can't explain it in a way that will satisfy you if you're the kind of person who needs things measured and repeated and signed off. We had measured and repeated what we could. The conservator photographed the display from 50 angles when she closed it. The boots were aligned perfectly parallel, heels at 3 and 9 o'clock relative to the front of the case. At 2 a.m., I checked the case just because I felt like we were missing something and they were still like that. At 3:15, when the steps starting earlier again, like a clock winding backward, the case fogged, the steps paused, and when the glass cleared, the boots inside the case were not parallel anymore. One had pivoted outward 15 degrees, pointing to the side door that leads to the loading bay. Luis took off his headset and rubbed his face with both hands. Nope, I'm not, but he didn't leave. Neither did I. We stood and watched as the steps, the real ones in the hall, turned and went that way. We followed. The sensors came on one after the other. We stopped at the door to the loading bay because we both felt it. A pressure drop like before a storm. A moment later, the deadbolt thudded even though the key hung from a hook next to me. It didn't unlock. It just made that solid mechanical noise as if a hand had tested it and found it unwilling. Then 3:17 came, and the pressure eased like something let go. We both exhaled. The next day, Deputy Rivas came by at Miss Carmichael's request. He's the kind of deputy you want for weird things. Patient, slow, kind to old ladies. He watched the security footage, listened to the audio, and asked practical questions. Have you had paranormal stuff before? He asked me quietly. Stuff is vague. He shook his head like he regretted the phrasing. I mean, you ever get pranksters? Ex-employees with keys? It's a small town, I said. Everyone has keys if you go far enough back. Then I told him the truth. I don't think this is a prank. Because of the fog. Because of everything. He checked the doors himself, looked under the cases like someone might be hiding under there, spoke with that same calm voice. Then he told us not to call him again unless a case broke. I don't want to write a report that says ghost, he said, with a small smile to show he wasn't mocking us. We didn't call. We adapted. That's what people do. We started timing our coffee so we'd be alert at exactly 3:10. We set the DVR to make redundant backups. Louis started bringing a little digital recorder from his podcast hobby and placing it on the glass case ledge every night at closing. If he says anything, Louis said, then stopped, realizing he'd said he. You pick your pronouns and live with them. The recorder got the steps better than our system. It caught a low sound too under the steps like cloth brushing. The small noises a uniform makes. One night the recorder caught something else. A single word mashed to the point of almost breaking, a sound like still, or steel, or stell. We listened to it 40 times and heard 50 words. We were too close. I went to see Tate on my day off. He was working on his truck under a shade frame rigged from an old billboard. He had dessert dust on his forearms to the elbow. What I remember most was his dog lying in the shade, beating its tail once when he said my name. You getting yourself scared over there? He asked, handing me a water. I'm getting myself tired, I said. There's a difference. Sure. Did you see a name on the cross before they took it? I asked. Any trace? He shook his head. Nothing. Is there anything out there we don't know about? Old stories? He looked past me toward the flats. There's always stories. Things wash up. Campers go missing. The desert doesn't like to give back, but sometimes it burps. Do you want the... I stopped. Do you want us to bring it back? He met my eyes in a way that let me know he'd had the thought before. Not until you figure out who he is, he said. Otherwise, you're just dumping him twice. I drove back with that in my head and the afternoon sun so white it hurt. I stopped by the museum and let myself in even though I wasn't on the schedule, because the building felt safe in the daytime, like a church. I stood in front of the case and tried saying names. That sounds stupid. There wasn't even a face to aim them at. But I said them anyway. Names I knew from old rosters. Names I borrowed from the Civil War plaque in the mining room. Nothing felt right. The wool in the case didn't move. I did notice something that I hadn't before. A small singe mark near the top of the case on the inside, right where the fog appeared every night. Glass doesn't get singe marks easily. It looked like heat had kissed it for a second. The way a match held too close leaves a faint crescent. I told Ms. Carmichael, and something in her posture changed. "Bring the cross," she said. "What?" "The burned cross. It's at the archaeologist's lab, but she'll let us borrow it for further contextual analysis." "Is that a phrase you practiced?" "It keeps people from asking why you want a cursed object." It took a day to arrange, and that night felt longer than any of the others. The steps came as usual, the pause at the case, the pivot toward the staff corridor. It was beginning to feel like a dance we couldn't stop. I slept in my car in the parking lot after shift because the idea of my quiet apartment without the building's noises felt too loud. The cross came the next afternoon, wrapped in tissue like a present. It was light in my hands, lighter than it should have been. The wood so dry it felt like holding the idea of wood. The nameplate was exactly what Tate said, scorched to a dark, featureless smoothness. When we set it on a plain stand beside the case, facing inward, something in the air eased. That's the only way I can say it. The room felt like someone who had been clenching their jaw finally let it go. That night the steps started later at 3:16. They came to the case, they paused at the cross. The breath fogged both the case and, for a second, the thin, burnished plate. A sound came, not a word but a low rasp like someone trying to remember how to speak. Louis squeezed my shoulder. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. I nodded. The steps went away and didn't do the staff corridor loop. They stopped before 3:17 as if rejecting the time itself. The next day, Ms. Carmichael pulled all the archive records she could find from 1878, 1881. We found mentions of a patrol that moved through the area. No names, just sergeant plus 5 men. We found a newspaper clipping from a territorial rag and a plastic sleeve that said simply, "Body of soldier recovered near dry lake after heat took him. Name withheld." It had no date and someone had clipped the bottom off. If you're rolling your eyes, I deserve it. It was like a bad movie, the one record that could confirm anything conveniently missing the line you needed. We made a decision that night we had no authority to make. We didn't tell the board or the state or the army. We agreed to try something human instead of something official. At 2:50 a.m., we opened the case. It took both of us, and a key we weren't supposed to use. The seal hissed when the air changed. I lifted the boots carefully, one in each hand. They weighed more than they looked. The leather, or whatever you call leather after that long, was cool. I set them on the floor in front of the case, heels aligned with the faint tape marks the conservator uses. Luis brought the cross from the stand and set it leaning against the case. "You want to say anything?" he asked. "I don't know what to say." "Me neither." We stepped back. The camera recorded us, and I'm glad it did because people later said we faked what happened next even to our own faces. The steps came at 3:14 earlier again, and they didn't turn this time. They came straight down the hall with a purpose you could feel in your chest. The air got that tight pressure feeling again. Both of us were shivering by the time the steps reached the case, even though the thermostat read 70 degrees. The boots on the floor shifted. Not much, just enough. They pivoted together, like someone slid their feet half an inch and then settled. The left one angled toward the side door again. The right one stayed mostly forward. It was such a normal, human thing, a stance you'd take if you were about to speak to someone on your right while keeping your body facing forward. It was mundane and intimate and terrible all at once, and then just once a voice came. Not through the recorder, not through the building. It came from the space between us and the glass. It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't loud either. And I promise you it said, clearly, a name. I will not type it here. That's the one thing I'm keeping. If I'm wrong and it wasn't a name, I don't want to put a stranger into this. Luis and I both heard it the same way. We said it back without meaning to, like a reflex, as if someone asked, "What's your name?" And you answer. The air pressure eased as if a door opened somewhere far away. We stood there for a long time after 317 came and went. The steps did not resume. The fog on the glass did not appear. We put the boots back in the case, hands shaking, and closed it. I slept in the office chair until sunrise because I was afraid to drive. The next days looked normal. People came to see the 1879 soldier. Kids put greasy hands on the glass and left smears we wiped with blue cloth. Ms. Carmichael started the paperwork to contact the Army with the name we thought we had, couching it in all the appropriate uncertainty. She didn't tell them about the voice. She phrased it like tentative identification based on contemporaneous accounts, which is fancy for, we guessed. Nothing happened at 317. Nothing happened at 314. For 3 nights, the building was exactly itself. I thought maybe we'd done the right thing. I thought stupidly that sometimes a problem can be solved by just being present and listening. On the 4th night after the name, the recorder captured something new. Not footsteps, not breath. It captured a squeak, the kind of sound boot leather makes when it bends sharply, then a scrape as if someone dragged something across a rough surface. At 317, there was a pop like a small jar opening, and then nothing. We found it in the morning. Ms. Carmichael found it actually standing with her hand over her mouth in the prep room. The crate where we'd stored the bones, wrapped carefully, labeled, sat with its lid askew. Nothing was out of place inside. Nothing was missing. But the little bundle that held the teeth had been moved. It lay closer to the uniform than before, as if gently placed there by someone who knew. "I didn't touch this," she whispered. "I believe you." We called the archaeologist. We said someone had compromised the storage and could she come secure it. She came with white gloves and a face like a filed-down knife. She checked everything, nodded, rewrapped. "Nothing disturbed," she said, in a tone that meant, "Not enough to report. Will you help us get permission to rebury?" "Ms. Carmichael asked. The archaeologist frowned. "Already? You wanted study?" We studied enough. We brought the cross back out to the museum floor for one more night. I don't know why. Maybe to say goodbye. Maybe because the room felt wrong without it. That night at 317, someone knocked on the glass 3 times. Not loud, polite. Then a pause. Then a single knock, like punctuation. A period. I swear to you I felt grateful and sick at the same time. The Army took longer than we wanted, but faster than a government usually does. 2 weeks later, we drove a small convoy out to Tate's place with permission in a folder and a chaplain with a thin book under his arm. The desert was quiet in that big way it is, even with trucks idling and people milling around. We found the same spot, scars still visible where the ground was brushed and sifted. We set the cross in the earth. We lowered the bones, we placed the boots last. It felt right to reverse the order we'd taken things. The chaplain read something. It didn't matter what. The wind took the words. We all said the name. When the last shovel of earth fell, the dog that had been lying under Tate's truck got up and walked to the edge of the flat. It looked out at nothing, ears perked as if listening. Then it wagged its tail exactly once and lay down again, bored. We drove back. We put the case in storage. We took down the placard. We went back to our jobs. I wish I could tell you that was the end, that now I sleep fine and the museum is just a building again. 2 nights after the reburial at 317, my apartment's hallway light flicked on even though I hadn't moved. I keep a motion sensor there because the switch is in a weird spot behind a shelf. The light clicked on and then clicked off. The thermostat made a little thud like it does when the AC kicks. The old pipe in the wall knocked 3 times. The kind of knock you do when you come home late and don't want to startle anyone. I lay there staring at the ceiling, telling myself I was inventing it. Then from my doorway I heard the quietest thing. Not a footstep exactly, but the memory of one. Leather bending, a boot heel in my head. I said the name soft. It came out cracked from sleep. Nothing answered. The light didn't flick on again. In the morning I told myself it was all just the residual stress of being too close to something strange for too long. But I started noticing the timings. The microwave clock would reset at 3:17 a.m., and nobody else in the building had a power blip. My phone would buzz with a notification that showed no message, stamped 3:17. I'd sit in the museum on my break and feel the breeze from the swamp cooler change temperature exactly at that minute. I know what confirmation bias is. I know it like I know the pattern of the lights in the North Hall. I also know I didn't choose the minute. The minute chose itself. Luis quit. He said it was for school, that he needed day hours. He didn't look me in the eye when he said it. I don't blame him. Ms. Carmichael grew careful and precise in a way that means she's hiding fear under professionalism. The board brought in a consultant who talked a lot about narratives and stakeholders. They put up a fresh display about the mystery of the 1879 soldier, without the uniform, with tasteful panels about frontier life. People still ask why the big case in the corner is empty. We tell them it's under rotation. On my nights off, I wake up at 3:17 even if I go to bed at 1. Sometimes I hear someone walking in the apartment above me, except I live on the top floor. The building is old. Pipes make noises. That's what I tell myself. Sometimes I hear the small exhale people make when they're deciding not to speak. A week ago, a letter came to the museum, addressed to caretaker. No return address, just a neat hand. Inside was a single strip of paper, the kind cut from the edge of a newspaper. It said, "Remains of soldier returned to rest near Pahrump. Name withheld at family's request. No date. No source." Ms. Carmichael and I stared at it like it might burn. We didn't tell anyone. We filed it. I'm writing this because last night in the museum something changed again. At 3:12 before the old hour, the security office door swung shut gently even though it has a hinge that sticks. I sat very still. The office smelled like old gun oil for a second and then it didn't. The hallway lights came on in a run, 1, 2, 3, toward the entrance instead of away. And then on the monitor showing the breezeway I saw dirt move. Not a lot. Just a small scatter of pale dust blowing along the ground in a straight line, the way it does when a person walks through it. The wind was still. The camera caught it anyway. The line led to the front door and stopped. No fog on the glass. No breath mark. Just absence. I don't know what that means. I don't know if it's over or if it moved. I don't know if I'm the one it moved with. I don't feel threatened. That's the strangest part. I feel watched sometimes, yes, at 3:17 most of all. The way you feel when someone stands in the doorway of a room you're in and doesn't want to interrupt. It's not a comforting feeling. It's not terror either. It's a kind of restless attention you can't shake. If the soldier wanted to do harm, he had a dozen ways to make that clear. He never did. He just walked. He checked the case. He pivoted toward the loading bay like he had somewhere to go. He tried to read his own name. I keep thinking about the singe on the inside of the glass and the burned nameplate at the grave. Someone went to a lot of trouble to erase him. That takes energy. That takes time. And whoever did it left the boots in such good shape that they carried the habit of a man across a century and a half. That's the part that won't leave me. The ordinariness of his route. He didn't bang and rattle. He paced the way a man does when the thing that made him himself was taken, and he wants it back. If you come to the museum, please don't ask to see the uniform. It isn't here. If you stand in the entrance at night and hear footsteps, don't post a video. If you wake up at 3:17 and the hallway light clicks on, don't panic. Say a name, even if you don't know the right one. Say it like you're saying it to a person, not a problem. And if you ever find a cross in the desert with a scorched, clean nameplate, don't touch it. Don't move it unless you have a way to put something back where it belongs. We didn't have that. We tried to make it. We did the best we could. As I typed this, my microwave beeped 3 times in the other room. The display shows 3:17 a.m., though my phone swears it's 3:03. I'm not getting up to fix it. I'm going to sit here and listen to my building breathe and the thin knock of the pipes and the click that might be nothing, or might be a heel turning. He hasn't made a sound tonight. Maybe he's finished. Maybe he's standing in my doorway deciding whether I've earned more sleep. Either way, if I hear pacing in the hall, I won't check the door. I'll keep my eyes down and say the name quiet, like a friend saying goodnight when he finally leaves. Then I'll wait for the stop I know is coming. I'll wait for the silence that always lands on 317 like a lid, and I'll lie there and listen to it stretch out into the dark thin as thread, with no weight except the weight I give it. I'm not a storyteller. I restore stone for a living, clean it, patch it, coax old names back into legibility. I do the unglamorous work, hours under a hat in damp heat, toothbrush in one hand, D2 sprayer in the other, talking to ants and reading dates on headstones until the numbers stop making sense. But I feel like I have to write this down, because I haven't set foot in a cemetery since June, and this used to be my favorite kind of job. This happened in Natchez, Mississippi, in the city cemetery that overlooks the river. If you've been, you know the hill and the way the air hangs close to the ground early or late like a sleeping dog on your chest. We were a small crew brought in to stabilize a private mausoleum the locals call the Crying House. The nickname wasn't just because the marble is streaked dark. On certain nights it looks like fresh tears running down the facade. Everyone else says it's condensation. I said that too. I said it a lot. There were 4 of us regulars, me, Miguel, and Tasha on restoration, and Earl is our site supervisor. Earl's from Vicksburg, one of those men who can stand with his hands in his pockets and still look like he's working. He knew every cemetery groundskeeper in the state by name. We also had a plastic chair regular named Lacey, the security guard, retired teacher. She kept her paperback face down on the seat whenever someone walked up, and she always had a literal jar of peppermints. A groundsman named Ben handled mowing and weed eating, and kept a water cooler wedged in the shade. The mausoleum belongs to a family you'd recognize if you read plaques in old towns. The first interment was sometime in the 1890s. The small plaques in the grass around it are more recent, cousins, in-laws. The family paid for us to deal with humidity damage after storms made the seal on the copper ventilation fail. Marble sweats, metal sweats, time wins. We were not supposed to open anything more than necessary. Our job was to clean biological growth on the outer walls, treat the mortar joints, and install a proper vent with a moisture filter. No internment changes, no investigation, nothing dramatic. Science and scaffolding. That's it. First day we set up scaffolding by 8 before the heat woke up. The Crying House is square, 4 columns, a peaked roof with a stone urn at the top. The front doors are bronze with a hammered design and a single narrow grille near the top. The doors were greased long ago, so when the wind pushed, they gave a tired little sound, like a violin tuning up in the next room. Sounds like it's sighing, Tasha said. Sounds like money, Earl told us, checking his clipboard. Miguel knocked on the stone, ear pressed to it. Solid, he said, and then, like he couldn't help himself, anybody home? If I had known then how much that question would echo, I would have told him to shut up. But there's a script crews fall into, jokes to make the day lighter. Cemeteries aren't heavy to people who work in them. They're quiet, except that day wasn't quiet. Cicadas were shrill and constant. Somewhere a woodpecker knocked. And from inside the mausoleum there was a faint, steady tapping like rain on metal. Earl tapped his pen against his folder just to be difficult. Condensation, he said. Water drips, metal rusts, expands, contracts. You'll hear things. We cleaned. We set the new vent housing. The old vent line had been capped decades ago, which turns a sealed interior into a slow cooker. We had permission to drill a relief hole to check interior humidity and equalize pressure before installing the new line. It was a 1/4-inch pilot, through a mortar joint near the side wing, not the marble. Standard practice, you go in at a joint you can repoint easily. Earl read the family's lawyer's letter twice, like saying it out loud made it safer. Relief hole, moisture check, reseal. By late morning, the tap sound in the vault hadn't stopped. Miguel pointed out that it sped up when the sun hit the stone. Heat pushes air, he said, like a stovepipe. He wasn't wrong, just too pleased with his theory. At lunch, Lacey and Ben came by to sit in the shadow of a live oak. Lacey said, "Say, y'all hear folks talking out there some nights? They do tours. Not ours. We keep this gate closed after sunset. But the ghost kids, they hop it. I catch them sometimes. That's probably what you hear. Teenagers." Ben didn't say much. He had a slow way of looking at you, like he was measuring out how soon you'd be done with the place. "Cries," he said finally. "Used to be worse before the storm. Then the storm broke it up." "What storm?" I asked. He chewed. The bad one 2 years back. Lightning hit near here. The glass in some of them lights exploded. Wind rattled loose a lot of things. Storms fix ghosts now? Miguel said. Ben shrugged. You asked. You hear the cries, it's just the river. The river talks when the wind runs it up the bluff. I remember the way the magnolia leaves shined that day. I remember the game I played, tapping my fingernail against my water jug and trying to match the rhythm coming from the tomb. It took me longer than it should have to notice that the rhythm matched me back just once. Like when you're whistling and someone else catches your tune from across a room. We drilled the relief hole after lunch. And if you've ever drilled into a quiet, sealed space, you know the first sound, a hush of air like the softest sigh. The drill bit warmed, the dust came out fine and pale. I had my hand on the masonry as it broke through, and the breath of the vault came up cool and damp. It was a nice, gentle smell, not what people think. No rot, no horror. Old flowers and stone and copper? Earl put his hygrometer to the hole. 98%, he said. Too high. We'll leave it open a while. We left a gauze cap on the hole so nothing crawled in. The tapping stopped. I told myself that meant the conditions were equalizing. Texture of the afternoon changed. When the sun slid down, shadows from the iron fence made stripes across the marble like a stern schoolteacher's skirt. Miguel said he had to hit the hardware store for a fitting. Tasha logged photos. Earl did an inventory of the sealants. I took one more slow walk around to check for hairline fractures. You can tell a lot by the sound stone makes under your knuckles. It's a language. The corners of the crying house sounded tight. The center panels had that deep, wet bell note that meant the interior air was close on the other side. When I paused by the relief hole, the gauze moved just barely as if breathing. I put my ear to the stone because that's what you do to reassure yourself. Physical evidence, rule out the imagination. I listened for mice. The cicadas faded to a uniform wall of noise. I told myself I sensed nothing. I heard nothing because that was the job. Then something touched the inside of the wall right where my ear was. Not a knock. Not a scrape. A slow drag from lower left upwards like the pad of a palm. It left a chill that sank into my jaw. I must have yelped. Tasha looked up, camera halfway to her face. You okay? Something's inside, I said, and heard myself say it the way you hear your shoe squeak in church. Earl didn't look up. Mice. Miguel from behind the scaffold called, Big mice. The slow drag happened again, and this time when I stepped back there was a print. Not detailed. This was inside the marble, not the outer face. It made the stone look slightly darker, like the breath on a mirror you can write in with your finger. It was the shape of a hand pressed from the wrong side of a window. Condensation, Earl said instantly. Reflex. Temperature differential. You've been leaning against it. Your ear's hot. The inside is cool. Then why is the mark inside, I said. My voice sounded thin and parched in the open air. He looked then. He was about to say something else, one of those rehearsed lines about science being unromantic, when the mark smeared, as if the hand slid down inside and then let go. I didn't sleep well that night. None of us did. Miguel texted a grainy photo of his hallway at 3:12 a.m., the smoke detector blinking. It's the vault, he wrote. It doesn't want to breathe. I told him to stop being an idiot and to check the battery. Day 2. The condensation streaks were thicker than usual, like the crying house had been up most of the night. The gauze cap had fallen off the relief hole. I told myself the gauze blew off. The air that came out of the hole was colder than the morning air. Less damp, too, like someone had run a dehumidifier all night inside there. We had work orders. We followed them. The more we did, the more the crying house tried to behave like a normal project. The tapping didn't return that morning. The smell stayed dry, but little things went wrong. You know how carpenters hang their hammers always in the same spot? Stone people do that with our brushes and chisels. Mine moved. Not dramatically, nothing cinematic. Just 6 inches to the left when I turned back from the water cooler. I thought I placed it there by accident. Then Tasha swore and accused Miguel of messing with her work bag. Her brush had fallen into an ant pile. Earl said, "We're tired. Focus up." That afternoon, a tour group came by, teenagers with their teacher, and I remember the way they stood far away to take photos. Like the mausoleum was a shy animal that might scare. The teacher called, "Is it true the marble cries?" And Earl waved and said, Yes, ma'am, but not for us. Lacey chewed a peppermint and told the kids to move along and lower their voices and, no, you cannot ask the workers for tarot readings. Go on now. After they left, we put in the new vent. You have to drill a little bigger to seat it. Earl wanted to do it himself and it felt dumbly ceremonial, like he was breaking a bottle on a ship's bow. The drill bit went in steady. The sound inside changed again. That hush like a room taking a breath after being quiet a long time. When the bit broke through, Miguel set a hand on the marble to steady himself and then pulled it off quickly. It's cold, he said. It's July and the rock is cold. That's good, Earl said, though he didn't look happy about it. He checked the hygrometer again at the hole, 92%. We bolted the vent flange. The copper tube hummed soft as it took air. We shouldn't have been there in the evening. We tried to end before dark, but the job had slid, and Earl wanted the sealant to cure before any overnight rain. By the time we applied the last line of mortar to the joint, the sky had that heavy lead tin look it gets before a storm. Light in the distance, dark directly overhead. Ben drove by in his golf cart and shouted, "Y'all know what y'all doing, right?" and then kept going without waiting for the answer. At dusk, the crying house cry lines thickened in a way I have not seen since, like something inside was pressing its face hard to the stone. Tasha said she could hear something under the cicadas like whispering. I didn't want to be the one to agree, but it was there, a low, damp, private sound like somebody talking into a towel. You can tell when people cry from their throat and when they cry from their chest. This was neither. It was like breath broken inside the tongue. I can't explain it better. We packed up faster. Earl said, "Lacey, we're gonna run over by 20. And Lacey said, "That's fine, baby, but make sure you put that chain back on the gate." You know in dreams when a door swings shut and you know composure is a fiction, and all you are is an animal who either gets out or doesn't. The bronze doors of the crying house swung a half-inch. They don't open, they're sealed. This was just the play of old metal flexing, but it hit that part of my brain. The wind wasn't strong enough to do it. The air from inside was, that sigh. It slicked the hair on my arms down. What if there's actually... Miguel started, but Tasha cut him off with a sharp wave. "Don't," she said. "Please don't." "What?" "A person," he said. "It's sealed. We know the interments. We know when. We know..." He didn't finish, because somebody knocked from inside the door, 3 times. Slow, patient, like someone making sure to be heard but not to scare you. We all stood perfectly still. Earl said, "We have to leave." His voice did something I've never heard, threaded toward a whisper and a command at the same time. "Lacey," Tasha called without turning her head. "You hear that?" Lacey's chair creaked. "No, and I don't want to. Y'all go on now. Tomorrow's fine." The knock came again. I felt a soft pressure through the soles of my boots like the ground exhaled. Then from the relief hole, the new copper vent breathed out a longer, cooler stream, the way a mouth does before it speaks. "Stop it," I said, and I might have been talking to my friends or to the stone or to myself. "Stop it. We're done." Earl took a step toward the door and put both palms flat to the bronze. The crying sound ceased instantly, as if someone inside realized he was there and was holding their breath to listen. Earl kept his hands there for maybe 10 seconds. His eyes were doing a calculation that you don't ever want to see someone do in a cemetery. Am I going to admit that I believe this? Then he moved his left hand and the bronze was colder where his palm had been. The sweat from his skin steamed a little in the damp heat. "Tomorrow," he said, and we left. We locked the gate with the old chain and walked down the hill, and nobody said anything until we were behind Lacey's office. Miguel's voice went up a register. "We can't leave it like that. If there is, if it's a raccoon even, we have to set something. A camera. Are you volunteering to sit watch?" Earl said. Miguel lied and said, "Yeah. The storm came in after midnight." I know because around 2, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing like it was crawling across the table. No caller ID, I didn't answer. The sound cut off, then came back 15 seconds later. I ignored it again. I texted the crew, "Y'all awake?" Tasha, "No." Miguel, "I think the ventilator is broken." He meant his apartment's AC. He joked like that even with no audience. At 3:30, I answered the call. Whoever it was didn't say anything. It was wind, and something that could have been rain or could have been the vent line humming, and beneath that a voice like a basement full of whispering. I hung up and threw the phone under my pillow like a child. It rang again. I put it under my foot. The mattress hummed with it. For a long time I thought, this is exactly how a story gets made out of nothing, out of wind and nerves. I slept between calls and woke full of gravel. Day 3, the crying house looked embarrassed. The streaks had dried. The marble was a little brighter from our work. If you had been a tourist, you'd have said we were doing excellent restoration. Earl signed his name with a date in the log he kept. He liked tangible facts. He handed me the hygrometer. Inside humidity at the vent read 78%. A miracle. Exactly what we wanted. Let's finish, he said, brisk. No knocks. No voices. Ben waved from the cart. Lacey had a new paperback. The whole cemetery world felt like it had decided to pretend with us. We had one last piece, caulking the relief hole after confirming the interior was stable. I held the tube. Miguel steadied the ladder. Tasha filmed because we always keep a record. Earl checked the reading again. 74, he said. Even better. I touched the nozzle to the mortar joint. The caulk went in even in white. My hand wasn't shaking. I want you to know that. I was not being dramatic. It was hot and I was thinking about lunch. Right before the joint filled, the nozzle fogged from inside, and a child's voice said, right in my ear, through the stone, "Please wait. That's the best I can do to describe it." It wasn't a word you hear with your outer ear. It was the specific sense of being addressed by something on the other side of a wall that had been listening to you for days and had finally decided you might listen back. I jumped and squeezed too hard and the caulk smeared over the hole. "Hey," Miguel said, grabbing my forearm. "You okay?" "I think," I said. And then the marble around the relief joint bloomed with 5 pale shapes like wet hands pressed flat from the inside. Small hands, more than one. They lifted and moved. One slid over another. Then they pressed again, harder. The bronze door let out a long metallic complaint like a trapped animal. The vent whistled. If Tasha hadn't filmed it, I would have told myself later that I imagined it. But she was filming. I know because she sent me the video 4 days later, after she quit and threw her phone in the river. She said she couldn't bear to have the clip on a device that could ever ring in the night. Earl swore long and low. He put his hand on the door again. He said, "We are not authorized." And it was like he was talking to a person who could hear forms filed with law offices. "We cannot open it." "I am sorry." The hands pressed higher up now, like whoever or whatever inside was reaching to where the grill was. I heard the not voice again. "Please." The kind of please you only say when you know they will say no and you're asking anyway. I don't know why I said it back. Maybe because the human brain tries politeness even when it shouldn't. I said out loud, "Please what?" And something changed in the air so abruptly that all the little hairs on my arms went up. The vent whispered a syllable that might have been mine, the same weight as my name. Not spoken, but matched. Then the temperature dropped. You could feel the stone give off cold like a refrigerator door opened in July. Earl tried to step back and his boot slid on the damp grass. He caught himself on the door and his palm left a clean handprint on the bronze where the patina had dulled it. 5 fingers splayed. 5 inner ones traced themselves opposite his, through the metal as if wanting to line up. He pulled his hand away like he'd been burned, but he hadn't been. There was no mark on his skin. The metal looked the same as it always had. Only Tasha's camera saw the wet outline. The lens sees what it is told to see. Ours don't, if we are lucky. We left the relief hole half-sealed because Earl said so and because none of us could bring ourselves to touch that line again. We packed, we fussed with straps. We did not look at each other. Lacey stood in the pathway with her peppermint jar like a person watching a thunderstorm that wants badly not to acknowledge it's already overhead. Before we went, Ben drove up and killed the cart engine and said, "The ground's sinking here sometimes. They used to say the vault wasn't right. Settled wrong. Air pocket, you install that? It might settle different. Are you telling us to open it?" Earl said with a sharp laugh he couldn't swallow. Ben started the cart. "I'm telling you I ain't coming up here tonight. We didn't either." We went back to the motel. We sat under the AC unit and let it drown out every thought we had. Earl typed his report to the lawyer. He wrote vent installed. Moisture reduced. Relief joint temporarily sealed pending recheck. He didn't write anything about hands or voices. He didn't believe in losing contracts, but he did say, "Nobody goes alone tomorrow. We go together. We go early." We reseal and we leave. We never resealed it. That night, the bronze door shifted in their frame. There's a mark on the jamb now. A crescent bright scrape you can see in the morning, like something pushed from inside exactly once and then changed its mind. The chain on the gate had fresh rust torn off where someone had tugged it. Lacey said she didn't hear anything. Ben didn't come in. The next day, the interior humidity read 68, the lowest we'd ever seen. We told ourselves the hands were condensation. We told ourselves the knocks were expansion. We told ourselves the voice was wind in the new copper. We told ourselves a lot of things. The way people do when they are next to something that looks like an answer and feels like a question that will never stop ringing. I quit that week. Tasha sent me the video with no subject line and then texted, "Delete it." I didn't delete it. I watched it once. In the video, my shoulders tense before the sound. You can see the exact frame where I hear it. You can see the exact place where something inside the wall places a small hand against the mortar opposite mine. It's not horror film stuff. It's two human gestures held up against each other by accident, like hands meeting through a pane of glass at an airport. Miguel still messages sometimes. He hasn't worked another cemetery job since either. He swears the vent sound traveled with him. He says sometimes his kitchen air duct hums and he answers it like he's drilling a relief hole in the world. Go ahead, breathe. He jokes because that's what he knows. How to do when the room fills up with water, and he refuses to admit he can't swim. Earl sent one last message the day the lawyer signed off on the check. He wrote, "Do not discuss. Family satisfied. Project complete." The family donated to the Cemetery Association. They are good people, I think. They want the marble to stop crying. They want the names on the stone to remain legible. I drove out of Natchez with the radio off. At the top of the hill as you leave the cemetery, there's a lane of trees and the air is always cooler there by 3 degrees, no matter the season. I rolled down my window. The river was the sound of a person thinking of something they can't say yet. Somewhere behind me, a vent line hummed, a little throat sound in a quiet room. 2 months later, I got a voicemail from an unknown number. It was only 8 seconds of nothing. Far back in the nothing, a tap, tap, tap. Then the click of a line closing. I put my phone face down and covered it with a towel. I told myself I would forget. That if I didn't talk about it, it would become one heat-dazed memory among all the others I have of old stone and hot days and bottle caps crushed into gravel. And most days that's true. Until I'm in a room that's been shut a long time and I open the door and feel the cool breath of it on my face like a hand asking for mine. Last week, someone sent me a link to an article from the Natchez Democrat. Local cemetery temporarily closing one lane for restoration. There's a photo with it. In the far right of the frame, only if you know where to look you can see the crying mausoleum. The marble is clean in that way that means it has been touched recently by people who care. In the photo, the air looks thick. Summer again. When I zoomed in, there was a shine on the bronze door that made me think of a wet palm. Probably a trick of the light. I'm good with those. I know how sunlight makes Lichtenberg lines across a wall. I know how heat lifting off stone makes mirages. I know the exact sound of a drill breaking through old mortar. I know every reasonable explanation for everything we saw. Also know what you hear when you press your ear to a cool surface that's been sealed for a century and a half and find out it has been listening to the world go on without it. You hear breath. You hear waiting. And if you're unlucky, you hear your name whispered back to you like it finally learned the shape of you from the way you spoke to it. I didn't go back. But if you do, if you stand under those live oaks when the air feels like a hand you can't shake off, if you see the marble crying and tell yourself it's just condensation, do what we didn't do. When you hear the knock, don't be polite. Don't say please. Don't answer at all, because whatever is in there is patient. It knows the words now, and it will ask you for yours. I wasn't supposed to be working nights. I'm a daytime guy, paint, drywall, haul out junk. But the subcontractor who handled demolition for the old Red Mesa Motor Lodge quit halfway through the job. Said the place had too many eyes, and my foreman asked if I could help watch the site until we boarded it up right. He didn't mean security guard. He meant be around, keep the new copper from walking off, and make sure nobody lit a campfire inside one of the rooms during the few weeks before the bulldozers showed. Flagstaff's colder than people think. Empty buildings draw the wrong kind of attention when the temperature drops. It was early February. The motel sat on the old highway. not far from a pawn shop and a boarded-up diner whose letters still clung to the roof, H&L Eats, like they were trying not to fall. The owner of the motel, a woman in her 70s named Mrs. Alvarado, kept a plastic bag of yellowed paperwork and a ring of brass keys in her purse. She met us the first day and watched us pry off door numbers with pocket knives. Her husband had built the place in the 60s when Route 66 still brought families through Arizona, with their windows down, and their radios turned to stations that faded in and out. In the way of a lot of these motels, they'd rented by the hour at the end, weekly, monthly, then not at all. The crew was small. Me, a guy named Victor who always wore a baseball cap even under hard hats, and Mariah, who could lift a stack of tile like it weighed nothing and kept a pack of chocolate donuts in her back pocket. No idea how, but she did. Our foreman, Hank, came by in the mornings with thermoses of coffee and warnings. He wasn't spooky, he was practical. Check for squatters. Watch where you step. If you smell propane, get out. And then, as he stood with his foot on a cinder block surveying the long row of doors faded from red to salmon to something like old gum. Room 6 used to get complaints about sounds under the floorboards. Mrs. A said it drove her husband nuts. They stripped the carpets twice. Nothing was wrong with the vents. Still got complaints. What kind of sounds? Mariah asked, biting a donut in half. Breathing, he said, like someone sleeping. We laughed because there wasn't much else to do. The rooms were time capsules mostly. Stiff floral curtains, tileless hangers, old televisions big as furniture. Bible drawers nobody had bothered to open in years. Room 6 didn't look any worse than the rest. The carpet had flattened in a perfect rectangle where a bed had been, and in the bathroom someone had patched the tile with gray grout that looked more like chewed gum than cement. There was a phone on the nightstand with a rotary dial and a cord cut clean near the base. The first night I was alone, I walked the row of doors with a flashlight. Light snow was coming down, the kind that looks like static in a headlamp, and the highway hissed out front. In the manager's office, I tried the space heater and then turned it off when it stank of dust and mouse droppings. I found a ledger on the desk and flipped through names written in tidy, looping cursive. 1964, 1965. A few pages had been torn out. On one side of the desk was a calendar still hanging from 1992. On the other, a Polaroid of a young couple standing in front of a Thunderbird. Someone had written "First night married, room 6" in blue pen. I remember locking the door, seeing the old keyring shining on the hook like toy coins. I took room 6's key as a joke. I told myself I wasn't really telling. I wanted to say later that I had slept in the haunted room or whatever. Mr. Nightmare material. My girlfriend at the time liked those YouTube stories. "You'll be famous," she said when I texted her a photo of the sign. Red Mesa Motor Lodge, kitchen's pet-friendly cable. Tell it in that whispery voice. I didn't sleep there, though. The thermostat didn't work, and the window wouldn't latch right, and my rational side didn't feel like stirring up old air. I rolled a sleeping bag out in the office on top of brittle carpet, drank grocery store coffee heated on a camp stove, and pretended to read a paperback I found behind the desk. Around 3 in the morning, I woke because my phone buzzed. The text was from Mariah. "You good?" It was time-stamped 2:13 a.m. and had apparently been sent an hour earlier. Reception at the motel was spotty. I wrote back, "Just snow." Then I heard something I thought was pipes, a slow exhale you feel more than hear, like a long sigh captured inside the walls. I sat up straight, heart hammering stupidly. The heater wasn't on. The office was about as quiet as an empty shoebox. The sigh came again from toward the row of rooms. I told myself wind. I told myself there's no floorboards here, they poured slabs back then. I pulled boots on and took the flashlight. Walking past room 2, I smelled old laundry. It had a specific sour-sweet smell that made me think of motel sheets ironed and folded and left too long in a humid closet. By room 4, the smell was stronger. By room 6, it was like pressing your nose into the inside of a stranger's pillowcase. That's when I realized I wasn't hearing wind. I was hearing a slow inhale, a pause, and then the kind of exhale somebody makes in deep sleep, lips barely open. I put my ear to the splintered baseboard and immediately felt stupid. The room was empty. My breath fogged the air in front of my headlamp beam. The sound didn't line up with me breathing, though. That was the part my brain snagged on. There was a lag, like I was listening to someone who hadn't noticed me. I used the key and opened room 6. The shadows made the corners look full, The carpet dent caught the flashlight and made me feel like a crime scene tech even though there was nothing to see. The air was warmer inside than outside, somehow stale without being any particular temperature. I shut the door behind me. The breathing continued steady, not labored, not wheezing, not close, not far. I crouched and pressed my palm flat to the carpet where the bed had been. I expected the cheap padding to be cold. It felt slightly warmer than the air. After a few moments, though, the sound seemed to fade. Not away, but down, like whoever it was had turned their face into a pillow. I did the adult thing. I told myself I'd lost my mind and left the room. I relocked it. Back in the office, I sat on the sleeping bag, waited to hear more and heard nothing. In the morning when Hank arrived, I didn't mention it. Neither did Mariah, who showed up with a box of donut sticks and a knit hat with a palm on top. It snowed harder until noon and then stopped, leaving everything coated the way a bakery dusts powdered sugar on a cake nobody really wants to eat. Over the next few days, little things started to add up. The ledger would be open to a different page when I came in at night. The phone in room 6 rang once around midnight with that weighty metal bell sound. Impossible, since the line had been cut at the base and there was no power in the room. I convinced myself I'd imagined it and then told myself I might as well answer. "Red Mesa front desk," I said, voice shaky enough that I felt stupid listening to it. Someone breathed on the other end. Not heavy, not prank call or creepy, sleepy like they didn't want to be woken up for a late check-in. "Wrong room?" I heard myself say before my brain caught up. I hung up fast enough that the cord jumped. I stood there a few seconds with my hand on the receiver like it might bite. On the 5th night, Victor pulled me aside at the end of his shift. He had plaster on his hoodie and a look that said he hated being the guy to say something he expected to get laughed at. "This'll sound dumb," he said, "but are you messing with the numbers?" "What numbers?" He jerked his chin toward the row of doors. 6, last night it was 9, this morning it was 6 again. "We pulled all the numbers," I said. "They're in the office in a box." "I know what I saw," he said. "The nail holes were filled. Someone did it proper," I shrugged. We both knew we didn't have time for games. Hank wanted the place gutted before the end of the month. The developer wanted to pour a new foundation in spring. By afternoon, we were prying baseboards in room 6 because the plan was to salvage anything with even minimal value. It was me and Mariah, and she had music playing low on her phone, a playlist she uses on painting jobs. Gentle indie stuff with slow drums that never gets in the way. The baseboard came off with a long shudder, and a wave of smell rolled out. A basement laundry line smell that made my back teeth throb. We both stepped away at the same time. "You smell that?" she said. "Yeah, it's like sheets." "From when?" I asked, because it wasn't right to say old, since it wasn't mildew and it wasn't BO, and it wasn't the perfume of the week that sometimes clings to thrift store clothes. It was linen on the edge of a wrinkle. "Yesterday?" she said, like that made sense. Behind the baseboard was a half-inch of gap before the slab, a gap filled with something off-white and thready. "Don't say it," she said, but I had already said cloth under my breath. We tugged at the strands with gloved fingers. They came out slow, long, and a little wet on the tips like they'd been absorbing humidity in there for years. Bedsheet. You could see the faint blue stripe that motels used to use for inventory. I looked at Mariah. She looked at me. She put her phone down and turned off the music. Then she said, "We call Hank." When he arrived, he made a face and clapped his hat against his leg like dust would help the situation. He was a common-sense guy, like I said. He picked up the edge of the baseboard with 2 fingers, smelled it, and looked out at the parking lot. "We should call the owner first," he said, which we did. She came fast, like she'd been waiting. "I told my husband this room needed to be torn down in 71, she said. "He told me the first thing that was wrong with it was the carpet, so he changed it. Then it was the vents. Then the bed frame. But no matter what, it was the same thing. People said they could hear breathing when they lay down. We'd give them a different room. Sometimes they wanted to leave. My husband pretended it was superstition, but he'd check every morning. He'd sit on the bed with his coffee and try to hear it himself. He never did," he said. "I think he was lying. You never opened it up?" Hank asked, "What? The floor?" She sounded offended, like he was suggesting they'd been hiding something. Then she seemed to hear herself and softened. "We didn't have the money, and we were scared, I think," Hank called the city. The city sent a guy who sent one more guy. By dusk, we had permission to remove a section of the slab. It felt wrong, like we were opening a mouth that didn't want to be opened. The slab cutter moaned and spat dust. We sprayed the blade to keep it from smoking, and the water ran into the gap and then didn't come back out. It was absorbed. We all stared as the concrete square came up and the hole underneath showed packed dirt and something pale that wasn't dirt at all. Mrs. Alvarado took one step forward, made a sound that I'll hear the rest of my life, and sat down hard on the carpet rectangle while Hank and the city guy both reached for her at once. Bones don't look like bones when you expect them to, not if you've only seen them in movies. They're softer around the edges. These were curled tight, knees to chest, like someone had run out of room and had made do with what they had. The sheet wrapped tight around whatever still held shape and had the faintest trace of that blue stripe. No coffin, no ID, no nothing. The city guy went quiet, then official in a hurry. He called the county. The county called the police. The police came with long faces and careful hands. They put up tape. They told us to give statements like we'd found a wallet after a parade. They asked Mrs. Alvarado if she knew anyone who'd gone missing back then. She pinched her lips and shook her head. "People leave," she said. "They didn't always tell anyone when they were going to. Did you ever tear out this floor?" The detective asked. "No," she said. "For the record," he said, and looked into the hole a long time like he was reading a page. He turned to Hank. "You guys working again tonight?" "No," Hank said, then looked at me. "I mean, we were just watching the place nights. We can break that off until this is sorted." The detective nodded. "Not a crime scene yet," he said, which meant a lot and nothing. "But keep it closed." We left, but leaving didn't help. I went to a diner and sat at the counter with a coffee I let go cold, thinking about the shape under the sheet and the way the sheet had held on like a secret. I should have gone home to my apartment by the tracks, but I didn't. I went back to the motel because I'd left my sleeping bag in the office and because I didn't want someone else to go there first, and because something in me felt like I'd disturbed a nest. The police tape flapped once in the wind as I ducked under it. In the office, I got my bag and then, I don't know why, I picked up the ledger. It opened easily to a page dated June 1968. A name had been written and then scratched out so hard it had broken the paper. C, then torn. The next line read "No charge" in a different hand. And below that, "Room Gauss," with no number filled in. There were tiny bits of blue lint pressed between the pages. It felt like looking at fingerprints in flour. The phone on the desk, not connected to anything, rang once. The sound filled the small room and then was gone. I held my breath. I counted to 5 the way you do when you think your car is about to die and you're praying it doesn't. It didn't ring again. I laughed once, too loud, so there wouldn't be room for anything else, and then I heard the breathing again. It seemed louder now. Not like someone asleep across the hall, like someone sleeping under your floor. I stood on the carpet and felt heat radiate up my shins. The smell of laundry swelled. You know how smells can make images in your brain? I pictured a bed stripped, a sheet folded at the corner the way nurses used to do, sharp enough to cut. I pictured the way my mother used to make my bed so tight I couldn't slide a foot under, without loosening a corner. Tucked in, was that the word? Tucked in. I grabbed my bag and started toward the door. I stopped. Out in the parking lot across the line of snow, someone had put the number back on room 6, I swear to you. 3 nails. Old brass 9 turned upside down so it was a 6 again. It looked like it had hung there since 1964. No tracks in the snow beneath it. I left. I went home and tried to sleep and didn't. When I closed my eyes, the breathing synced with mine. When I opened them, the sound lagged half a second like it took instructions from a different clock. In the morning, I told myself I'd imagined it all and told Hank I was sick. He said not to worry. The county was cordoning off a bigger area to excavate and nobody was going to be there for a day or 2. Just rest, he said. I nodded like that was possible and went for a drive. I ended up at the library. Newspapers from the 60s are more optimistic than today's. Even when there's bad news, the font is polite. I scrolled microfilm and saw wedding photos and high school band announcements and truck accident summaries. And once, in 1968, a line at the bottom of a column. Local girl missing. Last seen near Route 66, the article named her. I'm not going to write it here. You can find it if you're the kind of person who needs to. The article said she worked housekeeping 2 days a week at a motel west of town. It said she had a blue sweater. It said she'd recently dyed her hair and that her mother thought it was a phase. I drove to the police station with my stomach hollow. I gave the name to the detective and showed him a photo I'd taken of the ledger page. He didn't act impressed, which I appreciated. He said the county would coordinate with the medical examiner and that, given the age and condition, identification was a long shot. Then he asked me why I was so sure it was her. "I'm not," I said. "I heard breathing." He waited. I forced myself not to say more. His eyebrows lowered the way eyebrows do when someone decides to look at you with a different lens. He let me go with a card and a thanks in a measured tone that suggested he would not be calling unless there was reason. I didn't want to. But that night I went back. This part is the part I argue with myself about. I could say I was drawn. I could say the door was open and that felt like an invitation. I could say I left the lights on to show respect. The truth is simpler. I wanted to know if the breathing would stop now that the secret was out. It didn't. It changed. When I stepped into room 6, I heard a soft shift, like someone turning over under a heavy blanket. The hole in the floor had been covered with plywood and a piece of caution tape. The tape fluttered without wind. I stood a foot from it and said out loud, "We found you." That sounds ridiculous writing it. It sounded ridiculous then. But the air in the room warmed enough that my cheeks flushed. The smell of sheets got so strong I tasted cotton. The phone in the room, not connected, rang twice and stopped. I crossed to the nightstand and picked up the receiver anyway. I said, "Hello?" The line was dead, but I heard the other line the one old motels used to have click on, from the manager's office. A second later I heard my own voice from the desk in the office say, "Red Mesa front desk." I froze. The distance between the rooms was 15 feet and 50 years. I put the receiver down. In the office, I saw the desk phone's cradle sink as if a hand rested the receiver back in place. On the desk was the ledger, open to a page I hadn't left it on. This one showed 1971. The top half was clean. On the bottom, in quick, panicked hand, "Hector, stop, not here. She's..." And then a line of ink like the pen had been dragged sideways in a struggle. I shouldn't have been there. I knew that. But knowing something in your head doesn't make your feet move. Something moved under the plywood. Just a small shift like dirt settling. Then a slow inhalation filled the office and the room and my skull. My breath synced without my permission. I stood there long enough to cry and then to be angry at myself for crying. There are parts of a building that keep secrets better than others. Ceilings tell you what they've seen through stains. Floors pretend they have nothing to do with anything but weight. The plywood over the hole bowed a fraction of an inch and then straightened, like a lung testing itself. And then I had a thought that I wish I hadn't. If the breathing is real, if the sound is a thing and not just an echo, then something is making it. Something pulls air through dirt the way a harmonica pulls music through metal. Something calls and waits to be answered. I don't remember making the choice, but I knelt. I put my palm on the wood. The heat was stronger, I said as quietly as I could without being ridiculous. "We're going to move you. You won't be here much longer." On the far side of the plywood, fingers pressed up. That's how it felt to my hand. Not actual fingers, no joking, no horror stunt, just that shape of pressure in the way heat passes through. I pulled my hand back. The phone in room 6 rang again. Twice I didn't pick it up. I went to the door. I opened it. The parking lot looked like a photograph stuck to a corkboard. The snow had crusted. The highway whispered. In the window of room 6, I saw my reflection and a second shape over my shoulder that wasn't a shape at all. Just a darker section of dark that leaned forward slightly and listened. I locked the door behind me because that was the only thing I knew that was right. On the way to my truck, I saw the number on the next door had been turned, 6 upside down to make a 9. Somebody, I thought. Somebody moved it. Then I saw that the nail holes didn't line up, that the grain in the wood behind it had no fresh marks. It had always been that way and always not. You don't sound sane describing a magic trick you can't show. In the morning, the county came with people in paper suits and I stayed away like a respectful citizen. I didn't even text Mariah, which made me feel guilty, which made me stay away longer. When I finally went by the site 2 days later, the caution tape was gone and so was the section of slab, and the hole was deeper and wider with neat sides. The detective was there. He looked more tired than before. "We can't share details," he said, "but it's old her?" I asked. "We're working on it," he said. "There were wrapping materials, bedding." He looked at me like he wanted to ask if I'd put it there. He didn't. I appreciated that again. He said the owner was staying away, which was wise. He said we could continue work on the other rooms by next week. He told me to call if I remembered anything that seemed important. That night, the breathing came through my apartment floor. No motel under me, just tile and the neighbor below who never made a sound unless he dropped a pan. I turned off the radiators to be sure. The breathing kept time in that half-second delay that had started to feel like a second heartbeat. I put a pillow over my head and it didn't help. I slept anyway. In the morning, my phone had a voicemail from a number with the motel's old area code, the kind Flagstaff used before it split. The message was 60 seconds of sleep-slow air. I told myself the mind is a powerful muscle. I told myself I'd been hungry for a story before there was one. I told myself lots of things and none of them worked. So I did the only thing that did. I went to the motel again one last time. Before we started ripping out the rest of it, Mariah was there in the daylight, kneeling in room 6 with a dust mask pulled down around her neck. She'd never looked small to me before, but she did then, in that big empty square of carpet. "You hear it?" she asked, not standing up. "You do?" "Last night," she said. "Not here, home, through the vents, like someone trying not to wake me up." We stood together and looked at the plywood-covered hole and didn't say anything else. She took a donut out of her back pocket, changed her mind, and put it back. I laughed a little because even that was something like normal. We're all superstitious. We all want rules. The county finished their work by the end of that week. They said the remains would be analyzed, the sheet cataloged, the threads counted, the stripe compared to manufacturing records. They said they might know something by summer. They didn't say what I had already started to suspect. We hadn't uncovered a secret. We'd punctured a lid. The following Monday, the developer called Hank and told him to pause. "We're reevaluating the site plan," was the phrase he used, which meant someone in a suit had decided bones were bad for marketing. The motel sat a while longer. Snow melted and left lines of trash like borders around the rooms. Teenagers poked holes in the drywall with broom handles. Somebody spray-painted a smiley face on the office door and someone else added fangs. One morning I drove by on my way to another job and saw a truck out front with a logo for a different contractor. The sign out by the road said, "Coming soon, Red Mesa Suites." The word suites made me angry because it was clearly a lie. They'd be apartments people would hate to love. The truck bed had a pile of new wooden numbers still in plastic. I parked and went up to the site. A guy I didn't know was standing in room 6 measuring. He looked up as I crossed the threshold and said, "You're not supposed to be here." "Neither are you," I said, but not in a mean way, because none of us ever are. "You hear about the grave?" he asked, eyes bright with the way people get when there's gossip to feed a boring day. "More than I wanted to," I said. "They found more," he said. He gestured with the tape measure like a conductor. "Not bodies, just wrapping. Like someone was practicing. Under 8, under 10 were re-pouring all along the side. Under 6? I asked, throat gone raw. "They're leaving that section," he said. "To be respectful." Respectful. By then, the breathing in my apartment had eased, or maybe I'd stopped noticing. I'd adjusted to the offbeat cadence like you adjust to a neighbor's TV through the wall. But that night around 2, my phone lit up. It wasn't a call. It was the flashlight turning on by itself and throwing a cone of light across the ceiling. I didn't think much of it until I saw that the beam wasn't steady. It pulsed in and out like a lung. I sat up. I whispered into the empty room, "Okay." Then I went and stood over the spot near the radiator where the sound seemed strongest, and I said the stupidest thing I have ever said in my life. "Do you want to come with me?" The breathing stopped. For 3 seconds the silence had weight. Then, very softly, the tiniest sound. A sheet being folded. When I went back to the motel the next day, I brought a clean pillowcase with a blue stripe I'd bought at a thrift store. I tell myself it was for me, not for anything else. I tell myself I wanted a souvenir because somebody else was about to slap up drywall and granite and pretend this was all always meant to be upgraded. I went into room 6 and laid the pillowcase flat on the concrete near the hole. I stood there a long time and then I picked it up and put it back in my backpack because I realized I didn't want to own anything that belonged to the room. The last week before they finally bulldozed, a woman came by around dusk and stood on the sidewalk looking at the office door. Gray coat, hair in a long braid. She didn't come in. She looked like someone visiting a grave. She had that same polite sorrow the old newspaper headlines had. I walked over because I'm not the sort of person who can watch someone grieve and pretend I didn't see. "My mother worked here when she was a girl," she said before I could ask. "Long before I was born. She used to tell me she'd hear people breathing when no one was in the room. When I was little, I liked the story. When I got older, I realized she told it when she didn't want to talk about something else." "What's something else?" I asked. She smiled without humor. "Don't we all have one?" Then she pointed to the number on the door. "They renumbered after. They think that helps." "After what?" She looked at me then like she could see I already knew. "After someone used the wrong kind of tuck," she said so quietly I barely heard her. "You tuck the sheet under the mattress so the corners don't come loose. You don't tuck people, not even the parts of them you don't want to lose." She squeezed my arm like she was comforting me and walked away before I could say her mother's name. I haven't gone back since they paved the lot and put up new lights that make everything look like morning even when it isn't. People live there now. They put potted plants outside their doors and hang seasonal wreaths. If you didn't know, you wouldn't know. They list the units online with photos of gray, floors and white cabinets and words like updated and modern. The new manager is a guy in his 30s with a neat beard who nods at the tenants when they carry groceries. Kids ride scooters in the parking lot. Sometimes late, I'll drive past and the number 9 by the stairwell will look like a 6 from the angle of my headlights, and I'll feel the old rhythm of that breathing pull at me like the tide. I don't stop. I don't need to. It's not about the place, I've decided. It never was. Places don't keep secrets, people do. That room breathed because someone taught it how. If you stay there, if your lease says Red Mesa Suites and you push your couch against a wall that used to hold a telephone, you might hear a sound at night that seems like a draftsman's mistake. It'll lag a half beat behind your own. You'll convince yourself it's the neighbor. You'll put a towel along the baseboard. You'll tell yourself you're hearing your own blood. You'll be right, in a way. I still have the ledger photo on my phone. Sometimes I open it and look at the half-torn name and the blank where the room number should be, and the line that says, "No charge." I think about the way the cotton strands came away from the gap behind the baseboard, one by one like someone drawing a breath. I think about the woman in the gray coat saying we all have something we don't want to talk about. I think about how the phone rang when it wasn't connected, and how I answered even though I knew I shouldn't, and how the sound on the other end wasn't a voice, and how I replied anyway. Like the old manager answering a wake-up call she didn't want to place. A friend who likes to collect ghost stories asked me if it ever said anything. He wanted a piece of dialogue, something he could put in a video with a creepy piano under it. I told him no. He said, "That's not a story then." This is, though, and it isn't. It's a thing that happened and keeps happening the way wind happens, and you don't blame the window for rattling. If you want proof, come sleep one night in whatever they call the unit over the old room 6. Turn off your phone. Lie very still. Count your breaths. See if you don't feel the floor answer. Patient and polite like someone who has been waiting a long time for their checkout to be processed and doesn't want to cause trouble. If you hear it, don't go knocking on the manager's door. There's nothing he can do. There was never anything any of us could do except listen and tell the truth as we knew it, and try not to tuck the corners so tight that something that needs air can't get any. The rest, the dates, the names, belong to their families and the county and the quiet that comes after. Last thing, sometimes, usually around 2:13 a.m., my phone lights up on its own. The flashlight makes a white square on the ceiling, pulsing like a sleeping chest. I used to turn it off, irritated. Now I let it run. I lie there and match it for a while in and out like practicing with a metronome. It's not a conversation. It's not comfort. It's not even forgiveness. It's just two separate clocks in the dark, learning for a few minutes how to keep the same time.